Hello story enthusiasts. Welcome to Eclipse Wizardry. Today we venture into What If Tonks Found Harry Crying in Cupboard at Privet Drive Age 8 and Metamorphmagus Soul Bond shocked all magical Britain. Your support means everything. Like and subscribe. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Cupboard and the Chameleon. The thing about Privet Drive was that it was aggressively, almost offensively normal. Every lawn was the same shade of green. Every hedge was trimmed to the same aggressive right angle. Every car in every driveway was clean and sensible and utterly without personality, as though the residents of Little Whinging had held a secret vote sometime in the mid-70s and collectively decided that anything interesting was deeply suspect. Nymphadora Tonks had been walking up and down the street for 20 minutes and she already wanted to set something on fire. Not literally. Probably. Muggle integration assessment, she muttered to herself, pulling the crumpled parchment from her jacket pocket and reading the assignment brief for the fourth time, as though it might have changed since she last checked. It had not. Observe and document standard Muggle residential behavior in a suburban setting. Note any instances of unexplained phenomena. Record duration, 2 hours. Her supervisor at the Auror training program, a humorless man named Dursleys who had the personality of a filing cabinet, had handed her this assignment with the particular smugness of someone who thought they were putting an overeager 20-year-old in her place. Tonks had been an Auror trainee for 3 months. She had already disarmed 2 of her instructors by accident, redesigned her face to look like a third one as a prank that had admittedly gone slightly further than intended, and set a minor record for fastest completion of the concealment and disguise practical. Dursleys had decided she needed humbling. Hence, Privet Drive. She tucked the parchment back into her pocket and kept walking, her current face, chosen deliberately for fieldwork, nondescript, brown-haired, average height, feeling strange in the way all borrowed faces eventually did. Like wearing shoes that were technically the right size but shaped for someone else's feet. The street was quiet. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July, and most of the adults were presumably at work, their cars absent from driveways. A few children played in gardens further down the street, their shouts carrying faintly on the warm air. An elderly woman walked a small, outraged-looking dog past Tonks without making eye contact, which Tonks was fairly certain was just how Muggles greeted strangers rather than any specific comment on her disguise. She stopped outside number 4. Later, when people asked her what made her stop, journalists, Wizengamot members, her mother, Dumbledore himself with that particular look on his face, she never had a satisfying answer. There was no magical pull, no bolt of recognition, nothing that would make a good story. It was quieter than that. Something in the set of her shoulders shifted, the way it sometimes did when her magic was paying attention to something her conscious mind hadn't caught up with yet, and she found herself standing at the garden gate of a perfectly ordinary house on a perfectly ordinary street, looking at it. The garden was tidy. Tidier than tidy, actually, almost punishingly so, the kind of garden that looked like it was maintained out of anxiety rather than love. There were flowers that were technically attractive arranged in patterns that felt joyless. The front path was swept clean. The doorstep gleamed. There was a small window on the ground floor, to the left of the front door, set very low, almost at ground level. It was covered with a metal grill. Tonks looked at it for a long moment. Then she unlatched the gate, walked up the path, and crouched down in front of the window. The gap between the grill and the glass was narrow, maybe an inch. The glass itself was grimy on the inside, the outside was as clean as everything else on this street, but the inside surface had the particular quality of glass that was never cleaned because the person responsible for cleaning it couldn't actually reach it. Tonks leaned closer. Inside was darkness, the shape of a very small space, the suggestion of a cot or a low mattress. She heard it then. Very soft. Very controlled, the way crying sounds when someone has learned not to make noise doing it, not the loose, abandoned sobbing of someone letting themselves fall apart, but the tight, swallowed kind that leaves no trace if you're not listening for it. A child. Crying, alone, in a room the size of a large wardrobe, on a hot afternoon in July. Tonks stood up, walked to the front door, and knocked. Nothing happened for almost 30 seconds. Then footsteps, heavy, adult, unhurried, and the door swung open to reveal a woman who was, in Tonks's immediate and instinctive assessment, one of the least pleasant-looking people she had ever encountered. Not because she was physically unattractive in any remarkable way, but because her face had arranged itself over years into an expression of settled, permanent disapproval that sat there now even in apparent repose, like a default setting. She had a long neck and large, protuberant eyes that swept Tonks from head to foot with the efficiency of someone who had decided within the first half-second whether a person was worth acknowledging. "Yes," said Petunia Dursley. "Sorry to bother you," Tonks said, keeping her voice pleasant and her face carefully bland. "I'm from the council." She had the identification badge in her jacket pocket. Standard Auror fieldwork kit included several versions of Muggle official ID, and held it up briefly, not long enough to be scrutinized. "Environmental health. We've had some reports of damp in properties along this street. Mind if I take a quick look around?" "Purely routine." Petunia Dursley's expression shifted through several distinct phases in rapid succession: suspicion, the particular anxiety of someone who cares intensely about appearances, and finally a complicated calculation that landed on reluctant compliance. "The house is perfectly maintained," she said. "I don't see why." "Just a few minutes," Tonks said. She smiled. "Regulations, I'm afraid. You know how it is." Petunia stepped back from the door with the air of someone doing a large favor and not planning to let it go unacknowledged. Tonks stepped inside. The inside of the house was as relentlessly normal as the outside, with the added dimension of being stuffed with evidence of comfortable, well-funded family life. A large television. Framed photographs on the walls, a large, florid man, Petunia, a boy who appeared to be roughly 8 or 9, blond and substantially built, photographed in what looked like a succession of toy shops and birthday parties. There were shoes in the hallway, several pairs, adult men's shoes, women's shoes, a pair of very large children's trainers with the Velcro fastening starting to peel. No other children's shoes. "The kitchen is through here," Petunia began. "Actually," Tonks said, turning toward the short hallway that led under the stairs, "I'll start with the ground floor storage spaces. That's where damp usually originates." The door under the stairs was small, barely 4 feet high. There was a latch on the outside. Several latches, in fact, a bolt, a padlock, and a hook-and-eye fastening that struck Tonks as excessive for a broom cupboard. She had her hand on the bolt before Petunia said, sharply, "That's just storage." "Of course," Tonks said. She slid the bolt back. Opened the padlock with a small unlocking charm muttered under her breath, the sound covered by Petunia drawing herself up to say something else. She unhooked the hook-and-eye. She opened the door. The smell hit her first: small, enclosed space, unwashed bedding, and underneath that something that made her magic pull itself tight with a sound like a bowstring, the particular stale air of a place where fear had been sitting for a long time. The space under the stairs was larger than it looked from outside, but not by much. There was a small cot, not a child's proper bed, a camp cot, the canvas kind, with a thin blanket. A shelf made of unfinished plank wood held a stack of primary school textbooks, very worn, and a stub of pencil. There was a broken toy soldier in the corner that looked like it had been there for years. The walls had been written on, in small careful letters, a child's handwriting, spelling out sums and words and the names of things, as though someone had been keeping themselves company. In the cot, curled very small with his knees drawn up, was a boy. He was 8 years old, thin in a way that was immediately, viscerally wrong, not the natural wiriness of an active child but the sharp-elbowed, prominent-ribbed thinness of a child not getting enough to eat. His black hair was wildly disordered, sticking up at angles that seemed to defy physics. His face, even screwed up and tear-stained, was striking: high cheekbones, a mouth that was set with a kind of stubborn dignity that sat strangely on a child who was clearly trying very hard not to be heard crying. He wore clothes that were several sizes too large, a hand-me-down quality about them that suggested they had never been purchased for him. He had a black eye that was fading to yellow and green at the edges, which meant it was several days old. And on his forehead, half hidden by his fallen fringe, was a scar in the shape of a lightning bolt. Tonks had been in Auror training long enough to have developed a professional compartmentalization for moments that required action before feeling. She used it now. She filed everything she was feeling, the cold, clean rage, the sick, dropping horror, the older, stranger sensation that was her magic doing something she had never felt it do before, reaching toward this child like a compass needle swinging north. She filed all of it, and she looked at the boy, and she said, quietly, "Hey. What's your name?" The boy's eyes opened. They were extraordinarily green, not the ordinary green of a hazel eye tipping toward color, but the true, deep green of old bottle glass held up to light. He had been caught in the act of crying and he knew it, and the first thing his face did was compose itself. Shut down. Go neutral and watchful, the way Tonks had seen frightened animals go still when a larger shape appeared above them. He said nothing. "I'm not going to hurt you," Tonks said. She was still crouching in the doorway, not moving into the space, keeping herself small. "I promise." "What's your name?" Behind her, Petunia Dursley said, "His name is Harry. He's our nephew. He's being punished. This is none of your, Mrs. Dursley," Tonks said, without turning around, her voice going very level. "I would strongly recommend you stop talking." There was a pause. "My name is Harry," the boy said. His voice was quiet and a little hoarse from crying, but there was no tremor in it. Harry Potter. Tonks had known, from the scar. She had known from the moment the door came open. But hearing the name still landed like something physical, and she was grateful she was already crouching because she thought if she'd been standing it might have moved her. Harry Potter. 8 years old. In a cupboard. Under the stairs. "Hi, Harry," she said. "My name is Tonks. I'm going to help you, all right? But first I need you to do one thing for me." She held his gaze. "I need you to trust me for about the next 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. Can you do that?" Harry looked at her for a long moment. There was something in that look, a kind of careful, exhausted evaluation, the look of someone who had learned that trust was a finite resource to be spent very carefully. Then he nodded. Tonks stood up and turned around. Petunia Dursley had gone the color of old chalk. She was standing in the hallway with her arms folded tightly across her chest, and her large eyes were doing something complicated, shifting between outrage and a deeper, older anxiety. "He is being punished," she said again, but the authority had gone out of it. "He broke a window." Vernon decided. "I don't care," Tonks said. It wasn't the professional response. Her training said to document, to report through channels, to follow procedure. Her training had a great many things to say about what to do in situations involving child welfare in Muggle settings. Her training could, with respect, get absolutely bent. She held up the identification badge again, and this time she let Petunia look at it, really look at it. It said what it said when Petunia glanced at it, and it said something entirely different when Tonks looked at it, because it was not an environmental health badge at all. It was Ministry of Magic Identification. Trainee Auror, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. "Harry is coming with me," Tonks said. "You are not going to stop me. You are not going to call anyone. You are going to stand there and think very carefully about what the next conversation you have with the Ministry of Magic is going to look like, because it is going to happen, and it is going to cover everything in that cupboard in detail. Do you understand me?" Petunia's mouth opened. Closed. "Do you understand me?" Tonks said again, softer this time. The soft version was somehow worse, and Petunia, to her credit, understood this. "Yes," she said. Tonks turned back to the cupboard. Harry had sat up on the camp cot and was watching her with those extraordinary eyes. He had stopped crying entirely, not because he was performing composure for her benefit, she thought, but because something had shifted in the room's atmosphere and he was tracking it with the instincts of someone who had been reading rooms his entire life. "Can you walk okay?" she asked him. "Yeah," he said. "I'm fine." He said it with the automatic quality of someone who said it constantly and had long since stopped meaning it. "You don't have to be fine right now," Tonks told him. "We're leaving. Grab anything you want to take." Harry looked around the cupboard. He reached under the thin mattress and pulled out a photograph, worn at the edges, creased across the middle. She caught a glimpse of a young woman with dark red hair and the same green eyes. He put it in his pocket. He picked up the stub of pencil from the shelf and put that in his pocket too. He looked around once more, at the written-on walls, at the broken toy soldier in the corner. Then he stood up and looked at Tonks. "That's everything," he said. She wanted to say something. She didn't. She just stepped back from the door and let him come out. He was shorter than she'd thought, seeing him properly upright, quite small for 8, though she suspected that was the nutrition more than genetics. He walked with a kind of careful precision, watching where he put his feet, and he didn't look at Petunia Dursley as he came into the hallway. She noticed his hands weren't shaking. She noticed he didn't look at the photographs on the wall. She noticed he didn't look back at the cupboard door. They were almost to the front door when the back of the house boomed with the sound of large feet on stairs, and a voice that could have carried across a rugby pitch bellowed, "Petunia, what's going on?" "Is that brat?" Vernon Dursley came around the corner from the kitchen and stopped. He was a very large man, not tall, but massive in the way of someone who had been built broad to begin with and had then spent decades building more on top of that. He had a thick neck and a thick mustache and small, suspicious eyes that went from Tonks to Harry and back with the speed of someone doing a threat assessment. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What is this?" "This is my house, and that boy is leaving," Tonks said pleasantly. "With me." "You can't just." "I am," she said. "I'll call the police." Vernon's face was going the color of an overripe plum. "You're stealing my nephew, that's what this is, that is kidnapping." Tonks took the ministry badge out again and held it up so Vernon could see it. She didn't do anything clever with it this time. She just let him read what it said, and Vernon Dursley went silent in a way that was almost satisfying, his face cycling through several extreme emotions before landing, improbably, on fear. He had known, of course. She understood that now, seeing his reaction. The Dursleys had known what Harry was, what world he belonged to, what the thing on his forehead meant. They had known and they had locked him in a cupboard anyway. "Goodbye, Mr. Dursley," Tonks said. She opened the front door and they walked out into the July afternoon. They were at the gate when Harry said, quietly, "Are you actually from the government?" "Not exactly," Tonks said. "I'm from a different kind of government." She glanced down at him. "Are you all right?" "You already asked that," Harry said. "I'm asking again." He considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe," she said. "I promise." Harry was quiet for a moment. They were walking down Privet Drive, which still looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, the lawns and the hedges and the aggressively sensible cars. A woman across the street was watching them from behind her curtains. Tonks clocked her and didn't care. "You changed color," Harry said. Tonks blinked. She glanced down at him and found him looking up at her with those analytical green eyes. "My hair," she said. "Inside the house. It went pink." She hadn't done it deliberately. It happened sometimes, when she was angry, when her control slipped. "You noticed." "I always notice things like that," Harry said. There was nothing boastful in it, just statement of fact. "Is it magic?" "Yeah," she said. "It is." "Are you a witch?" "Or a trainee, technically, but yes." Harry nodded. absorbing this with the equanimity of someone who had suspected as much for quite some time and was mostly relieved to have confirmation. "I made the glass in my aunt's greenhouse blow out last year," he said. "She said I did it on purpose." "Did you?" "A little bit," Harry admitted. "She just told me I wasn't allowed to read my school books over the summer." He paused. "The normal school books, I mean, I didn't know there were other kinds." Tonks felt something in her chest do a complicated thing. She thought about what she was going to say next, thought about protocol, about procedure, about the 17 different regulations she was currently violating or about to violate, about Dawlish's face when she filed her field report, about Dumbledore, about the blood wards she'd been told existed on properties like these, about all of the infrastructure of the wizarding world that had, apparently, decided that this 8-year-old child's best option was a cupboard. "Right," she said. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take you to my parents' house. It's a Muggle-born wizard household. My dad's a Muggle, my mum's a witch, they're both completely brilliant, and they will absolutely feed you until you fall over." She glanced at him. "Then I'm going to make some very loud phone calls, they're like owls but faster, and some people are going to be very upset with me, and that's fine because I am going to be very upset with them." Harry looked up at her. For the first time since she'd opened that cupboard door, something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, but the shape of one, the potential for one, like a door that had been closed for a long time standing slightly ajar. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Tonks agreed. She turned left at the end of the street, pulled her wand from inside her jacket, a smooth, dark wand of 11 inches that fit her hand like part of it, and held it out. With a sound like a thunderclap that made a passing pigeon abandon its dignity entirely, a triple-decker bus in violent purple appeared from nowhere, lurching to a halt at the curb with its windows rattling. Harry stared at it. "The night bus," Tonks said. "Never the most comfortable option, but it has the advantage of accepting cash and not asking questions." "It's purple," Harry said. "It is extremely purple," Tonks agreed. "Come on." They got on the bus. The bus driver, a young man with a terrible attempt at a goatee who looked barely older than Tonks, opened his mouth to begin the standard welcome speech, caught Tonks's expression, and closed it again. She paid. They sat. The bus lurched into motion with physics-defying enthusiasm, and Harry grabbed the brass rail on the seat in front of him and held on, and Tonks watched his face as London began to scroll past outside the windows at impossible speed, the city folding around them like a map being unfolded and refolded in real time. He wasn't frightened. He was, and this struck Tonks somewhere deep and precise, he was delighted. Under all the composure and the careful watching and the two old eyes, there was a child who was 8 years old and had just discovered that the world was bigger and stranger and more vivid than anyone had ever let him know, and he was holding onto a brass rail on a purple bus going approximately 4 times the speed of sound through central London, and his knuckles were white but he was grinning. It was a small grin, tentative, like he wasn't sure he was allowed it. But it was there. Tonks looked away before he could catch her noticing. It was during the bus ride, somewhere between Surrey and the outskirts of Leeds, the night bus having the peculiar geography of something that existed slightly sideways to normal spatial rules, that it happened. It didn't announce itself. There was no crack of thunder or flash of light. There was just a moment where Tonks became aware that something had changed in the quality of the air around her, the way you become aware of a sound you can't identify, and she looked at Harry, and Harry was already looking at her with an expression of pure bewilderment. "Did you feel that?" he said. "Yeah," said Tonks. "What was it?" She had no answer for him. But her magic, which she had always experienced as a kind of ambient hum, something like hearing your own heartbeat, present but not intrusive, had shifted into something she had no framework for. It wasn't louder exactly. It was more like it had found a second frequency, a harmonic, something resonating alongside the fundamental note that had been there her whole life, vibrating in a register she hadn't known she had. She looked at her hand. The fingers were cycling through colors, peach to brown to pale blue to green and back again, fast and uncontrolled, nothing she was doing deliberately. She forced them back to her normal borrowed brown, and they held for 3 seconds before starting to drift again. "Your hand," Harry said. "I know. It did a rainbow." "I know." She stared at it. "That's never happened before." "Never?" "I'm a Metamorphmagus," she said, because explaining seemed preferable to both of them sitting in mutual bafflement. "It means I can change my appearance. My face, my hair, all of it. It's voluntary, usually. I don't normally just." She gestured at her hand, which was currently going through shades of gold. "Cycle." Harry looked at his own hands, spread flat on his knees. They looked entirely normal, small, scarred at the knuckles the way hands get when someone's been doing adult chores since they were old enough to hold a cloth. He turned them over, then back. "Something happened," he said. "Something happened," Tonks agreed. She was going to need to make those phone calls sooner than she'd planned. The Tonks family home was in Hertfordshire, a comfortable, slightly chaotic house that had been accumulating personality for 30 years in the form of books, instruments, mismatched furniture, a garden that was half deliberate and half Andromeda's magical experiments, and the accumulated residue of a household where two people who loved each other very differently had built something neither of them could have built alone. Ted Tonks opened the door before they knocked. He had an uncanny sense for when his daughter was coming, a skill developed over 2 decades of being surprised, which had eventually transmuted into preparedness. He was a large, comfortable man with gray-threaded hair and an open face, and he looked from Tonks to Harry with the particular expression of a parent who has learned to treat the unexpected as the expected. "Right," he said. "Kettle's on." Come in, come in." "Dad," Tonks said. "I can see, love." He crouched down, putting himself at Harry's eye level, and held out a hand. "Ted Tonks. You must be Harry." Harry shook his hand. "How did you know my name?" "I didn't," Ted said. "I just knew you'd have a name, and someone had to go first." He straightened up, gesturing them inside with a warmth that was entirely unself-conscious. "You look like you could use something to eat. My wife is in the kitchen and she will be absolutely furious with me if I let someone go hungry under our roof, so do me a favor and let her feed you before she takes it out on the garden again. Last time she was upset the roses tried to attack the postman." Harry almost smiled again. It made it to his eyes this time. Andromeda Tonks was in the kitchen, and she had apparently already known, in the way she often knew things that she had no logical mechanism for knowing, that she would be needed. There was soup on the hob, real soup, the slow-cooked kind that had been going for hours, and there was bread cooling on the counter, and there were several other things happening simultaneously on various burners that smelled extraordinary. She turned when they came in, and Tonks watched her mother's face do the same thing her father's had done, register the unexpected with rapid, unflustered precision, but there was something additional in Andromeda's expression. She was a black by birth, had grown up with the black family's bone-deep sensitivity to magic that was old and unusual, had spent 30 years building a life specifically in opposition to everything her family valued and still carried the knowledge those years had given her. She looked at Harry. She looked at Tonks. Her gaze dropped to Tonks's hand, which was still occasionally cycling through colors in a way that she had mostly but not entirely managed to suppress. "Oh," said Andromeda. "Yeah," said Tonks. "Dora." Her mother's voice was very careful. "When did this happen?" "On the bus." "Mum, I know who he is." Andromeda crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and crouched in front of Harry the way Ted had, looking at him with dark eyes that were direct and thorough and not unkind. "You're all right," she said. "I want you to know that first. Whatever has happened and whatever is going to happen next, you are completely safe in this house. Do you understand?" Harry looked at her for a moment with that careful evaluating look. Then, "Your daughter said something similar." "My daughter and I agree on most things," Andromeda said. "The important ones." She stood. "Sit down, Harry. Eat something." Then we're going to have a conversation, all of us, about something very unusual and very old, and I want you to have a full stomach for it because I suspect it is going to be a great deal to take in." Harry sat at the kitchen table. He ate 2 bowls of soup, 3 pieces of bread, and a substantial portion of a potato dish that Tonks had never learned the name of but had been the comfort food of her entire childhood. He ate with the focused, economical attention of someone who had been routinely hungry and had learned never to take food for granted. Nobody commented on it. Ted refilled his bowl without asking and talked about the cricket on the radio to fill the silence with something comfortable, and Harry, carefully, gradually, like a door opening by slow degrees, began to sit less like he was ready to run. Tonks drank her tea and watched her hand and thought about the harmonic in her magic, the second frequency, and what she knew, which was very little, about soul bonds. She knew they were rare. She knew they occurred between individuals whose magical signatures were, by some mechanism no one fully understood, complementary on a fundamental level. She knew that a Metamorphmagus bond was something she had read about exactly once, in a 7th-year advanced magical theory text that her mother had made her read when she first manifested her abilities, a single paragraph in a chapter about rare magical phenomena that had described it in the tone of something so unlikely it barely warranted the space it took up on the page. A Metamorphmagus soul bond, the text had said, occurs when a Metamorphmagus's malleable magical signature comes into contact with a complementary core of sufficient power and instability. The resulting bond stabilizes the Metamorphmagus's shifting magical field while simultaneously amplifying and grounding the partner's magic. Historical occurrence, for documented cases. Last recorded, 1694. She set down her tea. Harry was looking at her from across the table. "You're thinking about whatever happened on the bus," he said. "Yeah. Me too." He wrapped both hands around his mug of tea, proper tea, with milk and 2 sugars, as Ted had established was his preference with the efficiency of a man who took beverages seriously. "Is it a bad thing?" Tonks considered lying. She was actually quite good at lying, it was a useful skill for an Auror trainee. But looking at Harry Potter's careful green eyes across her mother's kitchen table, she found she didn't want to. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think it might be a very big thing. I'm not sure if big and bad are the same thing in this case." "They're not always," Harry said. He said it like someone who had learned this from experience, which, given his 8 years of experience, was both impressive and gutting. "No," Tonks agreed. "They're not always." Andromeda came and sat down at the table with her own tea, and Ted settled into the chair beside her, and for a moment the 4 of them sat in the warm kitchen with the late afternoon light coming in through the windows and the soup pot still steaming on the hob, and it was, ordinary. Quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't absence of noise but presence of something that functions like safety. "Right," said Andromeda. "Harry. What do you know about your parents?" "They died in a car crash," Harry said. "When I was a baby." Andromeda's expression didn't change. "And their names?" "I don't know my mum's first name. My dad was called James." Tonks watched her mother absorb this, the careful, controlled way she absorbed things that were difficult, and nod once. "Your mother's name was Lily," she said. "Your father's name was James Potter. They were both magical. They didn't die in a car crash." She reached across and touched the back of Harry's hand briefly, just once. "They were murdered by a dark wizard named Voldemort, when you were 15 months old. You survived because of your mother's magic. The scar on your forehead is from the curse he used. You're famous in our world, Harry. You have been since the night it happened." Harry was very still. The mug in his hands didn't move. His face had gone to that neutral, watchful place again, but this time Tonks could see something working behind his eyes, a kind of rapid, systematic filing and refiling, information being placed against other information, a picture assembling itself. "Famous," he said. "Yes." "For surviving." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. My aunt told me my parents were drunks, he said. That they died because my father was driving drunk. The word Tonks did not say sat in the air for a moment, and then she let it go, because Harry was still talking. She said I was a freak, he said, without particular emotion, the way you state established facts. Because of the things that happened around me. The glass and the flowers and the time my hair grew back overnight after she cut it. She said I was doing it on purpose to cause trouble. A pause. I did do some of it on purpose. But not all of it. None of it is freakish, Andromeda said. Every bit of it is magic, and magic is, it's just what we are, Harry said. He looked at Tonks. Like your hair. Like my hair, Tonks agreed. There was another pause. Am I staying here? Harry asked. Andromeda and Tonks exchanged a look over his head, the kind of look that covered a great deal of ground in a short time, the look of two people who had been reading each other for 20 years. In it, the question of the blood wards, Dumbledore, the ministry, the legal status of removing the boy who lived from his blood relatives. Against it, a black eye that was 4 days old and a child who had learned to cry without making noise. Yes, said Andromeda. For tonight, and then we'll work out the rest. Harry nodded. He picked up his tea and drank it. Later, when he was asleep in Tonks's old bedroom, small and slightly chaotic and still decorated with a poster of the holy head harpies that Tonks had never got around to taking down, Tonks and Andromeda stood in the kitchen while Ted washed up, and Andromeda said quietly, Dora. The bond. I know. You know what it means. I know what the textbook says it means. The textbook is an understatement. Andromeda's voice was very low. A Metamorphmagus soul bond hasn't happened since the 17th century. The last time it occurred, both parties involved manifested abilities that went significantly beyond their individual baselines. She looked at her daughter steadily. People will want to control that. Powerful people. People who have already decided what Harry Potter is supposed to be and what role he's supposed to play. Then they'll have to go through me, Tonks said. That is what I'm afraid of, Andromeda said, but the way she said it held something that was not entirely fear. Something older and more useful than fear. Mum, Tonks said. He spent 8 years in a cupboard. Whatever powerful people want with him, they can get in line behind what he deserves. Andromeda looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had walked away from one of the most powerful and terrible families in Wizarding Britain because she had decided love was more important than legacy, and who had never once regretted it. You always were the most stubborn thing I'd ever made, she said. I mean that as a compliment. Tonks's hair went pink. Not deliberately. It just did. She stopped trying to control it. Ch1 Chapter 2, The Weight of Old Magic. Harry woke up not knowing where he was. This was not unusual. He had a long history of waking up in places he'd rather not be, the cupboard, the garden when Vernon had decided the fresh air would do him good as punishment, the school nurse's office after Dudley's friends had got particularly creative. What was unusual was the way the not knowing felt. It wasn't the sharp, gulping panic of waking up to footsteps in the hall, the instinctive inventory of injuries, the calculation of how much noise could be made before it became a problem. It was just, quiet. Unfamiliar. Warm. He lay there and let his eyes adjust to the light coming through curtains that were a deep red, almost burgundy, slightly too short for the window so that a strip of morning sky showed above the sill. The room smelled like old books and something faintly herbal, and there was a poster of women on broomsticks on the wall opposite, real broomsticks, the flying kind, which he was still processing as a category of real thing, and the bed was actually a bed, deep and soft in the way the camp cot had never managed, the mattress taking his weight like something that was interested in the project. He put his hand under the pillow and checked. The photograph was there. So was the pencil stub. He got up. The house was quiet in the particular way of early morning, not silent but held, Ted's radio for a murmur through the floor, the sound of someone moving in the kitchen below. Harry found the bathroom, found a spare toothbrush still in its paper sleeve on the edge of the sink, left there deliberately. He understood, the way everything in this house seemed to be arranged with a kind of thoughtful anticipation of what might be needed. He washed his face and studied himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. The black eye had gone from green-yellow to a faint brown smudge. He pressed a finger to it experimentally. Still tender. He went downstairs. Ted was at the kitchen table with a newspaper, glasses pushed up onto his forehead, a mug of tea at his elbow and a second mug already set at the place beside him with the steam still rising. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment, and Ted looked up and said, "Morning." "Sit down." "Eggs?" "Please," Harry said. He sat. The tea was exactly how he'd had it the night before, which meant Ted remembered. Harry noticed this the way he noticed everything, quietly, filing it away. "Dora's still asleep," Ted said, unfolding himself from the table to go to the hob. He cracked eggs into a pan with the efficiency of long practice. "She's not a morning person. Never has been. When she was about your age she once turned her alarm clock pink and it stopped working. We never established whether that was deliberate." "Was it?" Harry asked. "We never established it," Ted said again, with the precision of a man maintaining a strategic position. "My wife is in the garden. She'll be in shortly. She gardens before breakfast when she needs to think. The plants don't argue with her the way we do." "The roses," Harry said, remembering the previous evening. "Ah, she told you about the postman." Ted set a plate in front of Harry, scrambled eggs, toast, a grilled tomato. "It was only the once. He hasn't complained since, which suggests either he forgave her or he's been rerouting." He sat back down and picked up his paper. "Eat." Harry ate. The eggs were very good, not because they were elaborate, but because they were made by someone who had been making them for 30 years and knew exactly what they were doing. He was halfway through when Andromeda came in from the garden, pulling off her gloves, her dark hair pinned up with what appeared to be a wand stuck through the knot of it. "Good morning," she said to Harry, in a tone that was warm but not effusive, which Harry found he preferred to the alternative. People who were too warm too quickly made him nervous. It implied an agenda. "Did you sleep?" "Yes," Harry said. He paused. "I didn't wake up once." Andromeda poured herself tea and sat across from him. "That matters," she said simply. He thought it probably did. The morning moved with the organic rhythm of a household that knew its own routines, Ted disappearing to his study, which appeared to be occupied mainly by engineering periodicals and a suspiciously large collection of jazz records, Andromeda moving through the kitchen with a purposeful quiet that suggested several things being considered simultaneously. Harry read the Harpies poster in detail and thought about broomsticks. He washed his own plate without being asked and dried it and put it in what turned out to be exactly the right cupboard, which gave him a small, uncomplicated satisfaction. Tonks appeared at 9:30, wearing an oversized jumper and with her hair the startling deep pink of the version Tonks he was apparently going to think of as default, although he understood intellectually that this wasn't her natural appearance any more than the brown-haired version had been. She stood at the kitchen counter and drank an entire glass of water in one go, then refilled it, then drank half of that, then turned and looked at Harry. "Right," she said. "Morning. How are you?" "Better," Harry said. And because it was true, a lot better. Tonks nodded as though this was confirmed data rather than good news, which somehow made it easier to say than if she'd smiled about it. "Okay," she said. "Today is going to be complicated." "How complicated?" "On a scale of 1 to the time I accidentally changed my face to look like my transfiguration professor during a practical exam." She poured tea. "About a 7. Andromeda, from the other side of the kitchen, said, the exam was a 9. It was the one before that was a 7. She caught Harry's look. "A Boggart lesson," she said. Dora was 15. The less said, the better. The less said, the better, Tonks agreed firmly. The complicated thing, as it turned out, had two components that arrived simultaneously and in different forms. The first was a letter, arriving by owl, a very large tawny owl that descended through the kitchen window with the proprietary confidence of something that had been places and expected doors to open for it, dropped a sealed envelope on the table in front of Andromeda, and departed without waiting for a reply. The second was a knock at the front door. Andromeda looked at the envelope, at the seal on it, purple wax impressed with a symbol Harry didn't recognize, a stylized P over a set of scales, and then looked at the front door as though she could see through it. "He's early," she said. "Is that surprising?" Tonks said, already moving toward the hallway. "Not in the slightest." Andromeda turned the envelope over once in her hands and put it on the table without opening it. "Harry. Stay in the kitchen, please. Just for a moment." Harry stayed. He heard the front door open, heard Tonks's voice, pleasantly neutral, the tone she'd used on the Dursleys' doorstep, and another voice, older and somehow larger, the kind of voice that seemed to take up more acoustic space than it had any right to. He couldn't make out the words. He ate the last piece of his toast. Then Tonks appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, "Harry. Come and meet Dumbledore." Albus Dumbledore was in the sitting room, and he was not what Harry had expected, which was itself notable because Harry hadn't expected anything. He'd had no framework for what the most famous wizard in Britain looked like, having been raised by people who treated the magical world as a disease to be quarantined rather than a reality to be acknowledged. But if he'd had to guess, he might have imagined someone severe and imposing. Instead there was a very tall, very old man with a remarkable silver beard and half-moon spectacles, wearing robes of deep blue that were covered in small silver stars, sitting in Ted's armchair with the particular quality of someone who sits in chairs as though they are thrones not because of arrogance but because they have simply never sat in a chair any other way. He had blue eyes that were, Harry noted, extremely attentive behind the gentle expression. "Harry," said Dumbledore. "How extraordinary. How very extraordinary." He said it with what appeared to be genuine pleasure, as though Harry were a pleasant surprise rather than a problem, and leaned slightly forward. "I must say, you have your mother's eyes." "People keep saying that," Harry said. Something flickered in Dumbledore's expression, not quite a wince, but the ghost of one. "I imagine they do," he said. "Please, sit down." "It's our house," Tonks said from the doorway. Dumbledore looked at her with the expression of someone who was recalibrating. "Of course. Forgive me." He gestured, inviting rather than directing this time. "Harry, if you're comfortable, I'd very much like to speak with you." Harry sat on the sofa. Tonks sat beside him. Andromeda came in from the kitchen and stood near the window with her tea, which was not sitting down, and which Harry suspected meant something about the dynamics in this room that he was still mapping. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a moment with those perceptive eyes, then looked at Tonks, then looked at Andromeda. His expression was one of careful, genuine gravity. "I think," he said, "that we should begin with an apology." The room was very still. "I placed Harry with his aunt and uncle because the blood wards are, a significant protection," Dumbledore said. His mother's sacrifice created a magical protection that was anchored to the blood connection. While Harry lived in a home with Petunia Dursley, the protection held. He looked at Harry directly. "I was aware that it was not a happy home. I was not aware of the full extent of the conditions." A pause. "I should have been." Harry looked at him. "The cupboard," he said. "Yes. I've been in there since I was about 3, Harry said. Not as an accusation. Just as information, offered clearly, the way you offer information when you want to make sure it has been received. They took me out for chores. And for school." Dumbledore looked, for a moment, quite old. "I know," he said. "And Harry, I am sorry. I was wrong to prioritize the protection without ensuring your welfare, and I was wrong not to have it properly monitored." He took off his spectacles and cleaned them with a fold of his robe in a gesture that was perhaps the most humanizing thing Harry had seen an adult do in years. What I am going to tell you next is not an excuse. It is context, and I want you to have it because you deserve to understand the full picture. Okay, Harry said. Dumbledore put his spectacles back on. Voldemort was not destroyed the night your parents died. He was diminished, reduced to a shade, something barely alive. But he is not gone. And there are those who serve him who have not given up hope of his return. The blood wards were the strongest protection I could provide against that threat. He met Harry's eyes. I was afraid that removing you from the protection would expose you to dangers I wasn't yet equipped to counter. There was a pause. Are you still afraid of that? Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. But I am also aware that the blood wards are no longer relevant, since you are no longer in residence at Privet Drive, and that the question of your safety takes several new forms this morning. He looked from Harry to Tonks. I need to discuss with you both what happened yesterday. The bond, Tonks said. The bond, Dumbledore confirmed. I assume you are both aware that something occurred. My magic went rainbow, Tonks said. I'm aware. A Metamorphmagus soul bond is, well. I have studied it, naturally. One studies most things when one has had as many years as I have. But I have never seen one. I don't believe anyone alive has. He looked at Harry with something that was not quite awe but was adjacent to it. The last recorded case involved a wizard named Emrys Cutheridge and a Metamorphmagus named Alicia Vance. Together they rewrote 3 chapters of established magical theory. He looked at Harry steadily. The bond chooses, Harry. I don't believe anyone fully understands the mechanism by which it does, but it does not occur accidentally. It occurs because 2 magical signatures are complementary, in a way that goes beyond simple compatibility. Yours and Nymphadora's are apparently, don't call me that, Tonks said. Dumbledore blinked. My apologies. Tonks and Harry's signatures are, apparently, fundamental counterparts. He looked at his own hands for a moment. Which means that the question of Harry's guardianship is now a great deal more complex than it was yesterday. He's not going back to the Dursleys, Tonks said. No, Dumbledore agreed, and he said it with a finality that sounded like a door being closed. He is not. Regardless of anything else, what Nymphadora, what Tonks described, what the evidence in that house suggests, that is not, it cannot continue. He looked at Harry. What I would ask is that we proceed carefully. The bond will draw attention. Powerful attention, not all of it benign. I would prefer that we have a plan before that attention arrives. I think the attention may already be on its way, Andromeda said from the window. She nodded at the envelope on the side table, which she had apparently brought through from the kitchen. That arrived this morning. I haven't opened it. Dumbledore looked at the envelope for a moment. Then he looked at Harry. May I? Harry glanced at Andromeda. She gave a small nod that meant, your call. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore picked up the envelope and opened it with a long finger, unfolding the parchment inside. His expression as he read was extraordinary in its control. Harry had been watching faces his entire life and he could read the micro-adjustments, the fractional tightening around the eyes, the slight shift in the set of the mouth, and what he was reading in Dumbledore's face was that the letter contained something that had surprised him and something else that had not surprised him at all. The Ministry, Dumbledore said, setting the letter down. They have detected the bond's magical signature. There are a great many monitoring systems in place for significant magical events. The bond generated a considerable amount of raw power when it formed, significantly more than would be usual even by the standards of historical accounts. He looked at Tonks. They are requesting that you and Harry report to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for assessment. Signed by Cornelius Fudge himself. A pause. And countersigned. By whom? Andromeda said. By Dolores Umbridge, Dumbledore said. The quality of the silence in the room changed. Andromeda's hand tightened on her tea mug. It was the only thing that moved. "No," she said. Just the one word, in a tone that had not raised its voice because it didn't need to. "I agree with your instinct," Dumbledore said. "Umbridge's involvement is concerning. She is currently Senior Undersecretary to the Minister, and her particular areas of interest include the regulation of what she considers uncontrolled magical phenomena, which I suspect a Metamorphmagus soul bond involving the boy who lived would constitute in her view." He looked at his hands again, then back up, and there was something in his eyes that was direct and unvarnished. "She will want to control it. To categorize it, contain it, make it legible and manageable in terms of ministry oversight. The last thing she will want is for Harry to understand what he is before she has decided what he is allowed to be." "So she can get in line," Tonks said. Dumbledore looked at her. "I beg your pardon?" "I said she can get in line," Tonks repeated pleasantly. She was sitting very straight on the sofa, her pink hair vivid in the morning light, with a quality about her that Harry was beginning to identify as the version of Tonks that meant she had made a decision and the decision was final. "Harry has been in a cupboard for 5 years. Whatever Umbridge wants to do with a form and a filing system can wait until he's had a few days to be somewhere that isn't a cupboard." "Tonks," Dumbledore said carefully, "refusing a ministry summons is well within his rights given that he's 8 years old and has no formal legal standing yet in our world because his magical guardian situation is currently completely unresolved," Tonks said. "Which I know because I am training to be an Auror and I actually read the legal modules, unlike most of my cohort." She turned to Harry. "Harry, do you want to go talk to ministry officials today?" Harry looked at her. Then at Dumbledore. Then back at her. "No," he said. "Noted," said Tonks. Dumbledore sat back in his chair and looked at Tonks for a long moment with an expression that moved through several stages and arrived somewhere that wasn't quite defeat but was unambiguously respect. "You are," he said, "very much your mother's daughter." "Thank you," said Andromeda from the window, with complete serenity. The morning restructured itself around the new reality. Dumbledore stayed for 2 more hours, and in that time the conversation shifted from confrontational to something more complicated, a negotiation between people who wanted different things but shared enough common ground to make the negotiation worthwhile. He was not, Harry decided, a bad man. He was a very intelligent man who had been in charge of very large things for a very long time and had developed, somewhere along the way, the habit of treating other people's lives as variables in an equation he was solving. He was trying to correct for this. Harry could see him trying. It was not nothing. What Dumbledore knew about the bond was extensive, if old. He had books, several of them arrived by owl in the early afternoon, thick and worn, transfigured down to pocket size for transit and then restored to their full dimensions on the sitting room floor, which Harry found immediately and completely wonderful without being able to articulate exactly why. He loved books. He had spent 5 years reading whatever he could get his hands on, library books from school, backs of cereal boxes, instruction manuals for Vernon's power tools, anything. The sight of 7 thick volumes appearing from nowhere on Andromeda's carpet hit him somewhere that had nothing to do with the bond. He picked up the nearest one. Concordant Magic, a study of soul bonds and paired magical signatures. The author's name was M. Flammel, which Dumbledore, noticing his interest, confirmed was a distant relation of the more famous one. Harry sat cross-legged on the sitting-room floor and opened it. "He reads quickly," Dumbledore observed to Andromeda, who had taken a seat and was going through another of the volumes with the efficiency of someone who did not need to be told to do their research. "He's been reading for survival for years," Andromeda said, without looking up. "Of course he reads quickly." The bond, as Harry understood it after an hour of reading while half listening to the adults discuss it, was a layering of 2 magical identities into a single resonant structure. Not a merger, neither his nor Tonks's magic had changed its fundamental character. But they had become, in some irreversible way, harmonically linked. What affected one would be felt by the other. Where one's magic was strong, the other's would be amplified. And because Tonks was a Metamorphmagus, because her magic was by nature fluid, adaptive, capable of changing its expression, the bond created a channel through which Harry's magic could do something it had never done before. It could stabilize. Harry had been living with magic that came out sideways, suddenly, in moments of intense emotion or distress, glass breaking, hair regrowing, things moving without his hands involved. He'd had no control over it because it had no stable channel. The bond gave it one. His magic now had something to orient around. But the reverse was also true. His power, and it was, the books made fairly clear, exceptional power, the kind that came from surviving a killing curse that should have been unsurvivable, was now feeding into Tonks's malleable magical core. Which meant that when she changed, she wasn't drawing on the limited reserves of her own signature alone. She was drawing on both of them. "Tonks," Harry said. She looked up from where she was sitting on the sofa, her own copy of one of Dumbledore's books open on her knee. "Yeah? Try something," he said. "Try changing into something specific. Not just your face." She looked at him for a moment. Then she set the book aside and closed her eyes. What happened next made Dumbledore set down his tea. Tonks had always been able to change her appearance, face, hair, height, within limits, the usual range of a Metamorphmagus. What she could not normally do was change with the speed and precision and depth that occurred now. It was not that she became something dramatically different. It was that the change happened as easily as breathing, instantaneous, total, down to the finest detail, a complete alteration of every feature with a fluency that looked less like magic and more like water finding the shape of whatever held it. She opened her eyes. She was wearing the face she'd had on Privet Drive, the nondescript borrowed face, and then she let it go and she was herself again, and then, by increments, she shifted. Her height increased by 4 inches. Her shoulders broadened. Her features rearranged. Within 30 seconds she was looking at them from inside the exact face and form of Dumbledore, complete to the half-moon spectacles, which she had conjured rather than simply simulated, and she regarded them all from behind it with an expression of theatrical wisdom before her own face reassembled itself, pink-haired and grinning. Dumbledore said, mildly, "That is remarkably detailed." "I didn't even try for the details," Tonks said. "They just came." She looked at Harry. "You felt that?" "Yeah," Harry said. He had felt it the way you feel it when someone standing very close to you moves quickly, not touching, but the displacement of air, the sense of energy redirected. "It felt like, when you changed, my magic shifted. Like it went somewhere. It went into the change," Andromeda said. She was looking at them both with an expression that was analytically fascinated and maternally alarmed in equal measure, which was a complicated face to hold simultaneously, but she managed it. "Your magic supported the transformation, Harry. Provided the structural integrity, if you want a metaphor. Tonks shifted the form, your power held it stable." She looked at Dumbledore. "That's what the historical accounts describe." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "The Van Scotheridge bond operated on exactly that principle. Together they were able to maintain a complete physical transformation for 6 continuous hours. Alone, Vance could manage perhaps 40 minutes. He looked at Harry. "Individually, you and Tonks are both exceptional. Together we're something the Ministry doesn't have a form for," Tonks said. "Which is why Umbridge wants you in a room quickly," Andromeda said. The afternoon brought a development none of them had anticipated. Harry was in the garden, Andromeda had shown him the non-aggressive portions of it, and he had spent an absorbing 20 minutes discovering that the plants near the back wall had opinions about being touched, expressed through small vibratory movements that were somehow not frightening but companionable, when he felt something. It was nothing he could have described to someone who hadn't experienced the bond. A shift in the harmonic, something off rhythm, not pain, not alarm exactly, but wrong, the way a note played flat sounds wrong even to someone who can't name the scale. He straightened up from where he'd been crouching near a very expressive rosemary bush and turned toward the house. Tonks was standing in the kitchen doorway, and she was completely still, which was wrong in itself because Tonks was never completely still. Her hair had gone white. Harry crossed the garden in 10 fast strides. "What?" "I just got a fire call," she said. Her voice was level in the particular way it had been outside the Dursleys' front door, controlled by effort rather than by nature. "From Dawlish. My supervisor." She looked at him. "The Ministry has filed an emergency guardianship petition. They're claiming that without a magical guardian of record, Harry is technically a ward of the Ministry, which gives Fudge's office grounds to request custody. Pending assessment." The word custody sat between them. "They can't," Harry said. "Technically they can." "Technically." Her jaw was very set. The blood wards at the Dursleys were registered with the Ministry as a guardianship arrangement. Now that he's left, the arrangement has legally lapsed. Under Clause 14 of the Wizarding Minors' Welfare Act, any magically active child under the age of 11 without a registered magical guardian can be placed into Ministry-supervised care pending resolution. She looked at her hands, which were going through colors again, slow and involuntary, cycling gold to purple to the particular red of anger. "Umbridge drafted it this morning. Dawlish read it to me off a memo he clearly didn't want to read." Harry looked at her. Then he looked at his own hands. He thought about what the book had said about the bond, about what they were, together, and what they could do. He thought about 8 years in a cupboard and a photograph under a mattress and the way he had learned not to cry loudly because crying loudly caused worse problems than crying quietly. He made a decision. "Call Dumbledore back," he said. "Call my mothers, call Andromeda. Get everyone in the same room." He met Tonks's eyes. "If the Ministry wants to have this fight, they can have it. But they should know what they're starting." Tonks looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression was, he wouldn't have called it surprised, exactly. More like recognition. The way you look at something you expected in theory and are startled anyway to encounter in fact. "Yeah," she said. "All right." Dumbledore was back within the hour, and this time he brought with him a witch named Amelia Bones, who was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and who had the face of someone who had been surprised by very few things in the last 20 years and was not planning to start. She had a monocle and a grey-threaded bun and a handshake that nearly took Tonks's fingers off, and when she looked at Harry she did not look at him the way most adults had looked at him, either with the particular studied blankness of not seeing, or with the weight of the boy who lived, the symbol, the narrative. She looked at him the way she looked at everyone, which was to say, with the complete attention of someone assessing the actual situation rather than the situation she'd expected to find. Harry liked her immediately. "Right," said Amelia Bones, sitting at Andromeda's kitchen table with a cup of tea she had accepted without ceremony, a roll of parchment she had brought with her already open in front of her. "Let me tell you what Umbridge is actually doing and why it has nothing to do with Harry's welfare." "Please," said Tonks. "Fudge is running scared," Amelia said bluntly. "The bond's signature hit our monitoring systems like a small explosion. Every department with a magical detection system got flagged. Fudge spent the first hour shouting at people and the second hour on the floor to Umbridge, and Umbridge spent the third hour drafting the guardianship petition." She looked at her parchment. "What she wants is to have Harry under Ministry authority before anyone else can establish a legal claim. Specifically, before you can." She looked at Tonks. "And before you can." "At Dumbledore." "Why does it matter who gets there first?" Harry said. "Because whoever has your guardianship has legal authority over your magical education and your public presence," Amelia said, with the direct, unapologetic clarity of someone who has decided a child deserves the real answer. "In plain terms, whoever controls your guardianship controls how you are trained, what you are told about yourself, and who you're allowed to speak to about the bond." She set down her quill. "Umbridge's specific interest is the Metamorphmagus aspect. She considers unregistered Metamorphmagi to be a security risk. I'm registered, Tonks said. The bond is not, Amelia said. The bond creates new magical capabilities in both of you, capabilities that exceed your individual registered profiles. In Umbridge's view, that makes you both non-compliant with your registration conditions and therefore subject to, she stopped. Subject to regulation. She wants to put us in a box, Harry said. Amelia looked at him with something that was almost a smile. She wants to put you in a very thoroughly documented and administratively controlled box, yes. Can she? Harry asked. Not without a Wizengamot hearing, Amelia said. And not without my department's cooperation, which she will not be getting. She looked at Dumbledore. I can block the emergency petition. It's overreach and I can make that case. But we have perhaps 48 hours before Fudge finds a different angle. She looked at Harry. In that time, we need to establish a proper legal guardianship. I'll take it, Tonks said immediately. You're 20 years old, Amelia said. I'm also his bonded partner, which is a magical relationship with legal standing under about 15 different precedents, Tonks said. And I have 2 parents with an established household who are willing to be co-guardians. She looked at her mother. Obviously, Andromeda said. It's unconventional, Amelia said. His entire situation is unconventional, Tonks said. He has a lightning bolt scar, he survived a killing curse, and he just discovered yesterday that he's famous for it. Unconventional is what we have. Amelia Bones looked at Tonks for a long moment. Then she looked at Harry. Harry, she said. This is ultimately your choice. Do you understand that? The magical world has been making choices about you since the night you survived. I want you to understand that you are allowed to have a say. Harry looked around the table, at Dumbledore, who was watching him with those careful, guilty, brilliant eyes, at Amelia Bones, who was watching him with straightforward professional regard, at Andromeda and Ted, who were watching him with something that was by now familiar enough that he could name it, a particular quality of attention that was warm without being demanding, at Tonks, who was watching him with that direct, uncomplicated look that he had understood from the moment she opened the cupboard door to mean exactly what it appeared to mean. He thought about the petition. He thought about Umbridge and her forms and her boxes. He thought about Dawlish and the assignment on Privet Drive and the slightly too short curtains in the room upstairs and the second mug of tea that had been ready before he came down. He thought about 8 years of other people deciding. I want to stay here, Harry said. With Tonks. With the Tonks family. He said it directly to Amelia Bones, the way she'd asked. I want that to be official, as fast as you can make it. Amelia Bones uncapped her quill. Then let's make it official, she said. The paperwork took until evening, not because it was complicated, but because magical legal documents involved 7 different kinds of ink, a wax seal that had to be pressed with a wand signature, and 2 witness statements written in a precise format that Amelia dictated from memory while simultaneously arguing on the flu with someone at the ministry who kept trying to interrupt and kept getting politely but immovably overridden. Harry sat at the kitchen table and watched the whole thing with the focused attention he gave to anything worth understanding. Ted brought him biscuits at some point and sat beside him and explained, in a quiet undertone, what each document was doing and why, which Harry appreciated because it meant the thing was being done with him rather than around him. At 7:15, Amelia Bones blotted the last document, looked at it with professional satisfaction, and said, "Done. Legal guardianship is registered with the Wizengamot record. Tonks and Andromeda are co-guardians with Ted Tonks as the Muggle legal equivalent. The ministry's petition is now moot." She rolled the document. Umbridge is going to be unpleasant about this. Umbridge can be as unpleasant as she likes, Andromeda said, setting a cup of tea in front of Amelia with the manner of someone closing a subject. Quite, said Amelia, and drank it. Dumbledore stayed after the others had gone, long enough to find Harry in the hallway putting on his shoes. Tonks had produced a pair from somewhere, proper ones, in roughly the right size, and to say, "Harry, I want to say something, if I may." Harry looked up at him. "I have spent a great deal of my life," Dumbledore said carefully, believing that suffering could be a useful tool. That it built character, or resolve, or the specific kind of strength that comes from having nothing to lose. He looked at Harry steadily. "I was wrong about that. Suffering in a cupboard does not build those things. What you have is not because of what your aunt and uncle did to you. It is despite it." He paused. "I am sorry I left you there." Harry thought about this. "I know," he said. "Thank you for saying it." Dumbledore nodded once, then turned and left. Harry watched the front door close. Tonks appeared at the top of the stairs, leaning over the banister, looking down at him with her hair currently an absent-minded yellow, the color it went when she wasn't thinking about it. "Dinner's ready," she said. "Mom made the potato thing again." "Good," Harry said. He went upstairs and washed his hands and came back down and sat at the table, and the light through the kitchen window was the long gold of late summer evening, and there was food on the table and people around it who had spent the entire day fighting, in every way they knew how, to make sure he was allowed to stay. He picked up his fork. It wasn't fixed. He knew that. Umbridge was still out there, and the Ministry still had 48 hours worth of unspent spite, and somewhere out in the world there were people who had decided what Harry Potter was before he had any say in it. But he was here, at this table, with these people, and no one had told him to eat in the kitchen while they ate somewhere else, and there were 2 more pieces of bread on the plate with his name on both of them. He took one. Chapter 3, Diagon Alley and the Boy Who Lived Loud. 3 weeks later, Harry had acquired several things he hadn't had before. A proper wardrobe, for one. Andromeda had taken him to the Muggle High Street in town with a measured, practical approach to the task that he appreciated, letting him pick without commentary except when he reached for the biggest, plainest things out of habit, at which point she simply said, "You're allowed to have opinions about color, Harry," and waited. He ended up with jeans that actually fit, 3 jumpers he genuinely liked, a dark green jacket, and trainers that belonged to him rather than being the discarded property of someone with feet 2 sizes larger. He had a library card, obtained by Ted with the cheerful efficiency of a man who considered libraries a human right rather than a privilege. The Hertfordshire Library had a reasonable fantasy section and an excellent natural science shelf, and a librarian named Mrs. Okafor who had taken one look at Harry on his first visit and pointed him directly to a series of astronomy books she apparently reserved for readers she'd assessed as serious. Harry had read all 6 of them in 10 days. He had a room, which was still Tonks's room technically but had stopped feeling like it, because Tonks had helped him rearrange it into a configuration that worked for him, desk under the window, bookshelves sorted by subject, and the Harpies poster had been joined by a star map that Ted had put up, the glow-in-the-dark kind, which meant the ceiling at night looked like something worth staring at. And he had, slowly and without ceremony, acquired the habit of talking. Not performing. Not the careful, minimal dialogue he'd developed for navigating the Dursley household, where saying the wrong thing cost more than saying nothing. Just, talking. About the astronomy books. About the bond, which continued to do unexpected things that they catalogued with a shared notebook that was half Tonks's chaotic scrawl and half Harry's precise small handwriting. About the magical world, which Andromeda was introducing to him with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that he had 5 years of catch-up to do and found the project genuinely interesting. The bond, over 3 weeks, had settled into something they were both learning the shape of. It wasn't intrusive, it didn't broadcast specific thoughts or feelings across the connection, which Harry had been privately relieved about, though he would have adapted either way. It was more like knowing, without checking, whether someone in the next room was awake. A background awareness, low-level, easy to ignore when life didn't require it and very hard to ignore when either of them was distressed or in danger or doing something magically intense. The intensity was the interesting part. Tonks's control had always been good, she'd been a Metamorphmagus since age 7, had trained her ability through school and into Auror candidacy. Now her control was extraordinary. She could hold multiple simultaneous transformations, her own face while changing her voice, her height while adjusting her features in real time, complete disguises that went down to the molecular level of fingerprints, which she had demonstrated for Amelia Bones one afternoon with the competitive satisfaction of someone showing off to a person who would genuinely appreciate it. Amelia had looked at the fingerprint match result for a long moment and said, very quietly, "Good Lord," which coming from Amelia Bones was roughly equivalent to anyone else falling off their chair. And Harry's magic had stopped coming out sideways. It had found its channel, and through that channel it had found its voice, and the voice was considerable. He wasn't doing it deliberately yet, the deliberate part was coming, they were working on it. Andromeda had begun a measured, practical curriculum that started with theory rather than practice because she was both wise and knew Harry well enough by now to understand he preferred to understand things before he tried to do them. But the ambient, unconscious magic that had always been the thing that got him in trouble at the Dursleys was now a different quality entirely. Less like a fire that caught unexpectedly, more like a banked thing, present and warm and waiting. It was Dumbledore, on his third visit, who suggested Diagon Alley. "He needs to see it," Dumbledore said, on the second Friday in August, sitting in his usual chair with a cup of tea and the particular expression of someone making a reasonable point he expected to be argued with. "He needs his school things, Hogwarts letters go out next month and it seems prudent to be prepared, and he needs to understand the world he's part of. Abstract knowledge is useful, but Diagon Alley is where the magical world lives its ordinary life. It is important that he experience that. The Ministry," Tonks began, "has been, thus far, restrained," Dumbledore said. "Amelia has held the line on the guardianship question. Fudge is unhappy but is currently occupied with a trade dispute with the Bulgarians. Umbridge is," he paused, "biding." "I don't love the word biding," Tonks said. "Nor do I. But what I love less is the idea of Harry being kept away from the world on the grounds that someone unpleasant might have opinions about his presence in it." Dumbledore looked at Harry. "What do you think?" Harry had learned, in 3 weeks of paying attention to how Dumbledore operated, that the old man's questions were often more complex than they appeared, that "what do you think" could mean "I want your genuine opinion," or it could mean "I want to gauge your readiness," or it could mean several other things stacked on top of each other. He suspected this one meant all three. "I want to go," Harry said. "I've wanted to go since the first night, when Andromeda started explaining things." He looked at Tonks. "I think it's the right move. Staying here isn't hiding, but it's starting to feel like it." Tonks looked at him. Then at her mother. "Saturday," Andromeda said, with the decisiveness of someone who had already been thinking about it. "We go Saturday, all of us, and we do it properly." The proper way, it turned out, involved several considerations that Harry found illuminating about the nature of the current situation. They would not be going through the Leaky Cauldron's front entrance, too visible, too public in the particular way of a place where wizards congregated and talked. They would be going through a side entrance that Andromeda knew, a quieter access point used mainly by residents of the more established magical households in Hertfordshire. They would not be announcing themselves. "We're not hiding," Tonks said, reading Harry's expression on the morning of Saturday as they got ready. "We're just not announcing it either. There's a difference. Once we're in Diagon Alley, we're in it. We're not putting on disguises and scurrying around. We're just not walking in through the front door with a banner." "What would the banner say?" Harry asked. "Something like 'The boy who lived is here, please feel free to stare and ask invasive questions,'" Tonks said. "Which is what it would functionally be, going through the Leaky Cauldron right now. Give it a year and maybe it's different. Right now, the last 3 weeks have been quiet and I'd like to stretch that out for as long as..." She stopped. Harry had been doing the thing where he half listened and half examined his reflection in the small mirror on the dresser. His hair was, as always, doing whatever it liked, which was to say sticking up at multiple angles in ways that conveyed both personality and structural ambition. He had got used to that. But he was looking at his hands, which were resting on the dresser's edge. They were very faintly luminous. Not noticeably so, you wouldn't see it in a bright room. But in the morning light at the angle it was coming through the window, there was a quality to the skin of his palms, something like the afterglow of a long exposure to heat. Warm from inside. Has that been there long? Tonks said, coming to stand beside him. I noticed it last week, Harry said. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. Tonks held her own hand up next to his. Her fingers were cycling gently through colors, the slow and voluntary kind that happened when she wasn't paying attention. The colors were warm ones. Gold, amber, the red-orange of late afternoon. She looked at her hand and then at Harry's. The bond's deepening, she said. Is that a problem? No, she said. It's just a thing that's happening. She dropped her hand. Come on. Mum's already at the front door and she has the face that means she'll leave without us if we're not down in 2 minutes. Andromeda did not leave without them, but she did have the face, and they were in the car, Ted's sensible estate car, which he drove with the focused competence of a man who refused to be intimidated by any road in England, within 4 minutes. Ted was not coming. This had been a brief, gentle discussion at breakfast, with Ted explaining that he'd been to Diagon Alley twice and had spent both times being either stared at or spoken to very slowly, and that he had a very good book and a very comfortable garden, and that they should bring him something interesting from the apothecary because he wanted to see if there was a magical equivalent of the mineral supplement he'd been taking for his knees. Get the skill grow if they have it, he told Andromeda as they left. And the honey from the magical bees if Slug and Jiggers has any. And look after our boys. He said the last part looking at Harry and Tonks both, with the casual, unperformed quality of a man for whom warmth was not a special occasion. Our boys. Harry got in the car. The side entrance to Diagon Alley was in an alley, obviously enough, behind a second-hand bookshop in Hertford, through a door that looked like it led to a stockroom but opened, when Andromeda tapped it with her wand in a specific sequence, onto the wider-than-it-should-be flagstoned lane that was the back approach to the alley's northern end. They came out between a robes shop and what appeared to be a very small bank that dealt exclusively in foreign magical currency, and then they were in it. Diagon Alley. The thing about Diagon Alley, Harry understood it in the first 30 seconds, was that it was alive in a way that Privet Drive was categorically not. Not just the magic, though that was everywhere, a constant low-level fizzing in the air that the bond picked up and amplified into something that made his palms warm. It was the people. The density of personality per square meter was extraordinary, robes in every color, arguments in multiple languages, an owl conducting what appeared to be a one-sided negotiation with a fruit stall owner, a small child on a training broomstick 3 feet off the ground being chased by her frantic father, a very old witch sitting outside a tea shop with a copy of the Daily Prophet that she appeared to be arguing back at. An apothecary on the left emitting smells that ranged from wonderful to alarming. A bookshop on the right with a display that kept rearranging itself. Harry stood at the entrance to all of it and felt something that he had no word for in his existing vocabulary, something that settled into the space where the word home would go if he were the kind of person who had that word available. Okay? Tonks said quietly. Yeah, he said. Let's go. They started at Gringotts, because Andromeda had explained that Harry had a vault, an inheritance from his parents, held in trust, which Dumbledore had been managing the access restrictions on, and that one of the first orders of business for a child with properly arranged guardianship was establishing his own access to it. The bank was vast and white and staffed by creatures who were shorter than Harry and radiated the professional disdain of people who had been in the banking business since before human beings invented money and had opinions about everything that had happened since. The goblin at the main desk looked at Andromeda's guardianship documentation and then at Harry for a long moment. Potter, he said. Vault 687. He looked at Harry with extraordinary, small, sharp eyes. You have not visited before. No, Harry said. Your vault has increased in value since its establishment, the goblin said, with the tone of someone providing a fact rather than making a point. There are also several items held in storage pending the primary heir's majority or a magical guardian's authorization. He looked at Andromeda. The documentation is in order. The heir may access the vault. The cart ride down into the vaults was the second extraordinary thing about the morning. Harry sat next to Tonks with his hands braced on the sides and the wind hitting his face at a speed that the cart seemed indifferent to, the torchlit walls flickering past, and the cart taking corners with an enthusiasm for physics that made Tonks grab the rail and made Harry laugh, a real one, unguarded, surprised out of him, and Tonks looked at him with an expression he had learned to identify as pleased even when she was simultaneously pretending to be focused on surviving the descent. The vault was a lot. He'd been prepared for there to be money, had absorbed the concept abstractly. The reality of standing in a room full of gold coins was different from the concept. He didn't spend long in there. He took what Andromeda indicated was a reasonable amount for the day's expenses and for establishing a small personal fund, listened to the goblin explain the mechanics of the vault access with the attention he gave to anything logistical, and came back out. He was fine until they were back on the main floor, and then a witch passing the desk stopped. She was maybe 40, well-dressed, with a kind face that went through 4 expressions in the space of 2 seconds when she looked at Harry, the blank recognition of seeing someone she knew, then confusion, then a dawning, extraordinary realization. "That's," she started. "Morning," Tonks said pleasantly, already moving, a hand on Harry's shoulder steering him gently but with complete intention toward the exit. But the witch said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "Lily's boy," and Harry turned his head. She had tears in her eyes. Not dramatic, performed tears. The kind that arrive without permission, honest and involuntary, the tears of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has just been reminded why. He didn't know what to do with that. He stood there for a second, with Tonks's hand on his shoulder, and looked at the woman who was crying quietly in Gringotts because she had recognized his mother's eyes. "Hi," he said. She made a soft sound and pressed her hand to her mouth and then composed herself with visible effort, and said, "Sorry. I'm sorry. I knew your parents, years ago." A pause. "You look like her." "I know," Harry said. "I have the photograph." She looked at him for another moment, then nodded, a small, decided nod, and walked on without another word. Harry watched her go. "Okay?" Tonks said. "Yeah," Harry said. He meant it this time differently than he had at the alley entrance, less expansive, more interior. "Yeah. Come on." The bookshop was flourish and blots, and it was everything Harry had hoped, which was substantial because his hopes had been high. He stood in the doorway for a moment and just breathed it, old paper, dust, binding glue, and over all of it the particular smell of magical books which was not quite like Muggle books, something alive in it, something that suggested the words inside were not entirely dormant. Andromeda gave him a list of standard first-year texts. They were going on the assumption that Harry would be at Hogwarts next year, which Dumbledore had confirmed was being arranged, and then stood back and let him do his own shopping, which she had clearly identified as the correct approach, because Harry moved through the shop with the focus of someone who had been waiting years for this exact experience. He got the school books. He also got 3 others that had nothing directly to do with the curriculum, a history of magical Britain that looked like it disagreed with the standard version, a practical guide to magical theory that was written in the conversational tone of someone who found the subject genuinely exciting rather than obligatory, and a small, very old book on the back of a clearance shelf called On the Nature of Paired Magic whose spine had nearly fallen off but whose index, on brief inspection, contained 3 entries that referenced Metamorphmagus bonds. He was at the counter with his stack when he became aware of the change in the shop's atmosphere. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the collective shift of a space full of people all becoming aware of the same thing simultaneously, the way a room changes when someone walks into it who changes rooms. He'd been in the shop for 20 minutes without anyone paying him particular attention, just a boy browsing books, but something had shifted. He could feel it even before anyone said anything, eyes settling on him, the small adjustments of people who had recognized something. His hair, he thought. It was the hair, the wild, uncontrollable dark hair that no amount of Andromeda's attempts with a brush had ever actually subdued, and beneath the fringe the edge of the scar, visible when he looked down. A boy of maybe 12 said to his mother, in a carrying whisper that he clearly intended to be quieter than it was, "Mom, is that?" "It is," his mother said. Someone across the shop said, "Potter," in a tone that was entirely different from the boy's and entirely different from the woman at Gringotts. This one had the quality of someone reading a headline, not meeting a person. Tonks appeared at Harry's elbow with the efficiency of a seeker catching a snitch. "Still want to do this quietly?" she murmured. Harry set his books on the counter. The shop had gone very still. He could feel maybe 20 people watching him, that collective watching attention that had a pressure to it, a weight. He thought about Umbridge biding. He thought about the ministry's petition and the fact that the last 3 weeks of quiet had been the quiet of a held breath. He thought about what it meant to be out here, visible, in the middle of Diagon Alley, as himself. He turned around. He didn't perform it. He didn't puff up or project. He just turned around and looked at the shop full of people who were looking at him, and he let them look, and his expression was perfectly, completely calm. "Hi," he said, to the room in general, in a voice that carried without effort. "I'm Harry. I've been told you've been waiting. Sorry it took so long." The silence lasted 2 full seconds. Then the 12-year-old boy laughed, a bright, surprised, genuine laugh, and someone else laughed too, and the pressure broke, and people were moving again, and a man near the window said, "Welcome back, son," in a voice that was rough with something more than casual greeting, and the woman at Gringotts might have been crying, but this was different. This was a room full of people exhaling something they'd been holding for 8 years. The shop owner processed Harry's purchase in a state of barely contained emotion that he managed with professional dignity, accepting payment with both hands and a nod that was almost a bow. They were back on the street when it happened. The street was busier now, mid-morning on a Saturday in August, and the alley was full. Harry was walking between Tonks and Andromeda, the bag of books slung over his shoulder, and the alley was doing what it had been doing all morning, living its complicated, vivid, slightly chaotic life around them. Which was fine. Normal. Expected. What was not expected was the pair of ministry officials in plum-colored robes standing outside Madame Malkin's, clearly waiting, with the particular quality of waiting that was less about patience and more about positioning. One of them was someone Harry didn't know, a square-built wizard with an official look about him, the kind of man who had assistant sub-secretary written in the set of his shoulders. The other one was a woman. She was short and wide, with a face that put Harry in mind of a toad, not cruelly, just accurately, the way a description is cruel only if it's inaccurate. She had small, pale eyes and a fixed, sweet smile that had nothing behind it, and she was wearing a cardigan the color of dried blood under her robes. She looked at Harry with those pale eyes and the smile went nowhere, and she said, in a voice like pink icing spread over something that had gone off, "Harry, dear. What a lovely surprise." Tonks stopped walking. "Dolores," Andromeda said, with a pleasantness that was exquisitely controlled. "Andromeda. Lovely." Umbridge's eyes didn't move from Harry. "And you must be Nymphadora." She said the name with a very slight emphasis, not quite contemptuous, more the tone of someone marking a category. "I've been hoping for a chance to meet you both." The smile remained. It was, Harry thought, the most static smile he'd ever seen on a human face. It didn't flicker or shift the way real smiles did. It was installed. "I wonder if we might have a quick word." "We're shopping," Tonks said. "Of course. Of course. It won't take a moment." Umbridge looked at Harry with that fixed sweetness and said, "Harry, the ministry is so very pleased that you're safe and being looked after. We've been so concerned. All of us." She put a hand briefly to her chest in a gesture of sincerity so performed it was almost art. "The minister himself asked me to extend his personal welcome back to our world. We are all," a pause, waited, deliberate, "so very invested in your well-being." "That's nice," Harry said. Umbridge blinked. Something behind the fixed smile recalibrated. She had expected, Harry suspected, either a tongue-tied child or a deferential one, and she was getting neither. We do feel, Umbridge continued, the icing voice perfectly level, that the current guardianship arrangement, though we understand it was assembled rather quickly, might benefit from some ministry oversight. For Harry's protection, naturally. The bond you've formed with young Nymphadora here is, she paused again, the same weighted quality, quite remarkable. Unprecedented. And unprecedented things, in our experience, benefit enormously from proper guidance and supervision. We have proper guidance, Andromeda said. We have Albus Dumbledore. Yes, Umbridge said. The smile went somewhere very slightly different. Well. And we have Amelia Bones, Tonks said. Amelia is a very dedicated public servant, Umbridge said, in a tone that made dedicated public servant sound like a mild criticism. Though of course the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has rather a great deal on its plate at present. The minister feels that a dedicated liaison, no thank you, Harry said. Umbridge looked at him. He met her pale eyes, and he held them, and there was something happening in the air around him that he could feel, the bond resonating, Tonks's magic and his in that harmonious double frequency, and he knew, from the slight widening of Umbridge's eyes and the fractional stiffening of the square-built wizard behind her, that they could feel it too. He was not afraid of Dolores Umbridge. He was 8 years old and he had spent 8 years being afraid, and he was done with it in a way that was not performance or bravado but simple factual completion, like a chapter of a book that was over. He was not afraid of her and he needed her to know that. I understand what you want, he said, still in that same even voice. You want a ministry person in my life so the ministry can decide what I know about myself and what I'm allowed to do with it. You've dressed it up nicely but that's what it is. He tilted his head slightly. I'm 8. I know I'm 8. You've decided that means I won't see through it. A pause. I see through it. The alley had gone quiet around them in a bubble of about 10 feet. People passing had slowed. We're listening. Umbridge's smile had not moved. It was, if anything, more fixed than before. Harry, she said, with a softness that had something cold in it, you are a child, and there are people in this world who wish you harm. The ministry put me in a cupboard, Harry said. Not literally. I know you didn't build the cupboard. But the ministry knew where I was and what my guardianship situation was and nobody checked on me once in 8 years. He was not angry. He was remarkably calm, even to himself. So when the ministry tells me it wants to keep me safe, I have some questions about the track record. The silence in the bubble was absolute. Umbridge looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Tonks, and the look was not sweet, was not iced over, was something much more direct and much less palatable. We will be in touch, she said. You can send an owl to our solicitor, Andromeda said. His name is on the guardianship registration. Umbridge turned and walked away, the square-built wizard falling into step behind her. She didn't look back. The bubble dispersed. The alley resumed. People moved again, though several of them looked at Harry as they went, and the looks were not the looks from earlier in Flourish and Blots, not the weight of the symbol, the narrative, the boy who lived. These were the looks of people who had watched an 8-year-old look Dolores Umbridge in the eye and tell her, without flinching, that he understood exactly what she was doing. A wizard nearby, maybe 60, with paint on his robes from what looked like a sign-making project, said to no one in particular, well, I'll be damned. Come on, Tonks said, to Harry, and she said it with an expression on her face that she was not bothering to school into neutrality. She was proud. Not performed proud, not well done, here is a pat on the head. The real kind, that showed up in the particular way her shoulders had relaxed and in the quality of the pink in her hair, which had gone so vivid in the last 10 minutes that 2 children passing had pointed at it. They finished the shopping. Madame Malkin measured Harry for robes with professional efficiency and absolutely nothing to say about the brief scene on her doorstep, fitting him with the focused attention of someone who had been dressing the wizarding world for 40 years and had seen everything. The apothecary produced Ted's honey from the magical bees after a 10-minute search involving 2 ladders and a very loud argument with a preserved specimen jar. An owl supply shop resulted in a long and seriously conducted negotiation between Harry and an extraordinarily small and self-important tawny owlet who eventually agreed to come home with them on his own terms, whatever those turned out to be. Harry named him Ptolemy, after the astronomer. They were at the side exit, the late afternoon turning the alley gold, when Andromeda said, "You know that's going to be in the Prophet tomorrow." "Yeah," Harry said. "Are you all right with that?" He thought about it. The woman in Gringotts and her honest, unbidden tears. The man with the rough voice and his welcome back. The bookshop full of people who had laughed and exhaled and let 8 years of held breath go. He thought about Umbridge's pale, still eyes and the smile with nothing in it and the word oversight carrying the full weight of what it actually meant. "Yes," he said. "I think I need to be." Tonks was already through the door, Ptolemy balanced on her shoulder, and she looked back at Harry with the afternoon light behind her, her hair the most vivid pink it had been all day, and said, "For what it's worth, you were extraordinary today." "I was just myself," Harry said. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I said." The Prophet, the next morning, ran a full front-page piece. It was not, in the end, a piece Harry had expected. He sat at the kitchen table with Ted reading the Prophet over his shoulder, because Ted had developed the habit of reading it with Harry on the grounds that magical current events were interesting and also his commentary on the journalistic standards was genuinely entertaining. The headline read, "Harry Potter Returns, and He's Not Hiding." The article was primarily factual, which was unusual for the Prophet by Andromeda's assessment. It described Harry's appearance in Diagon Alley, the encounter outside Madame Malkin's, quoted 3 witnesses to the confrontation with Umbridge with varying degrees of accuracy, and included a photograph that Harry had not been aware was being taken, showing him outside Flourish and Blots with his bag of books, looking. He studied it for a moment, not like a symbol. Not like a headline. Like a kid who'd had a good morning. The article's last paragraph was the one that Ted read aloud. "He looked her right in the eye," said one witness, who wished to remain anonymous. "Not like a child looks at an adult. Like he knew something she didn't. I haven't seen anyone look at Umbridge like that since Dumbledore." Whatever the Ministry was expecting from Harry Potter's return to our world, it is becoming apparent that the expectation may require significant revision. Ted set the paper down. He was quiet for a moment. "Your father," he said, "was apparently very much like you. From what Andromeda has told me." He picked up his tea. "I never met him. But I think he'd have enjoyed yesterday." Harry looked at the photograph on the front page. He looked at the boy in it, himself, who was just himself, who had walked into the magical world for the first time and met it without flinching. He thought about Umbridge's pale eyes. He thought about the filing systems and the oversight and the controlled boxes. He thought about the 48 hours of ministry spite that Amelia had said they had, which were now 3 weeks gone, and what it meant that Umbridge was still out there, still biding, having now been publicly told no by an 8-year-old on a street full of witnesses. "She's not done," Tonks said, coming downstairs with Ptolemy on her shoulder, reading the article over Harry's shoulder from behind. "Umbridge. That conversation outside Malkin's, she doesn't do public embarrassment quietly." "No," Andromeda said from the kitchen. "So she moves to a different angle," Tonks said. "Yes," Andromeda said. Tonks sat down across from Harry. Ptolemy stepped off her shoulder onto the table and looked at the newspaper photograph with the expression of an owlet who considered himself relevant to all proceedings. Harry reached out and he stepped onto Harry's hand immediately, as though this had always been the arrangement. "What's the different angle?" Harry said. Tonks looked at him for a moment, then at the newspaper, then at the empty space in the air between them where the bond lived, that frequency, that harmonic, that thing neither of them fully had the language for yet. Sirius Black, she said. The name was unfamiliar to Harry, which meant it was something he needed to learn. He looked at Andromeda. Andromeda had gone very still over her mug of tea. That, she said, carefully, is a complicated name in this family. Tell me, Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she set down her mug and sat at the table, and she started from the beginning. Chapter 4, The Prisoner and the Bond. Sirius Black had been in Azkaban for 8 years. Andromeda explained it the way she explained everything, directly, without softening the edges, with the particular honesty of someone who had decided years ago that truth served people better than comfort. She told Harry about the Blacks, the family she'd grown up in, the constellation of names that marked a lineage that considered itself among the finest in wizarding Britain. She told him about Sirius, brilliant, reckless, furiously principled even as a child, the kind of person who took up more space than rooms could comfortably hold. She told him about the Potters, about James and Sirius's friendship, about Lily and James's wedding where Sirius had stood as best man and cried, which nobody who knew him was allowed to mention publicly. She told him about the night Voldemort fell. About Peter Pettigrew, supposedly blown apart on a Muggle street by a grief-mad Sirius, 12 Muggles dead in the explosion. About the Ministry arriving to find Sirius laughing amid the rubble, laughing, which the witnesses had interpreted as the laughter of a man who had done what he'd come to do. She told him that Sirius had gone to Azkaban without a trial. Harry sat very still through all of it. No trial, he said, when she finished. No trial, Andromeda said. They just put him there. They were in a hurry, Andromeda said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite bitterness, something older and colder than bitterness, the settled quality of a person who has had 8 years to examine an injustice and has not become accustomed to it, because some injustices don't permit accustomization. Voldemort had just fallen. People were celebrating and grieving simultaneously. Sirius had been the Potters' secret keeper, everyone assumed he'd given them up to Voldemort. The evidence fit the story. Nobody wanted to look too carefully at whether the story fit the evidence. Did he do it? Harry asked. Andromeda looked at him directly. I don't know, she said. I have questions. I have always had questions. But I haven't seen Sirius in 8 years, and I don't know what 8 years in Azkaban does to the truth a person carries. She thinks he didn't, Tonks said, from her chair at the table's end, where she had been quiet through the whole thing with the quality of someone who knows a story already but is listening to make sure they haven't missed anything. She looked at her mother. She's always thought he didn't. Andromeda didn't contradict this. He was my cousin, she said. He was the only member of my family who came to my wedding. The only one who was, genuinely pleased for me. The others came because propriety demanded it, and even then only half of them. Sirius came because he loved me. A pause. I have thought about it for 8 years and I cannot make myself believe he gave James and Lily to Voldemort. She looked at Harry. But I am not objective. I know I'm not objective. What does this have to do with Umbridge? Harry said. Sirius is a Black, Tonks said. Which means he and Andromeda are connected in the family registry. Which means the bond, our bond, which is now a matter of public record, connects you to me, and me to Andromeda, and Andromeda to the Black family line. She leaned forward. Umbridge has spent years trying to build a case for expanded ministry authority over old magical families. The Blacks are the biggest unresolved legal tangle in the pure-blood world, Sirius in Azkaban, Regulus dead, Bellatrix in Azkaban, Narcissa's status complicated by Lucius's political position. If Umbridge can attach the bond to the Black family question, she can argue for ministry oversight of the entire connected magical structure. A pause. Which includes you. Harry absorbed this. She can use Sirius to get to me. She can use the question of Sirius, Andromeda said. His guilt, his sanity, the status of his family assets. All of it unresolved, all of it legally murky, all of it now adjacent to you through the bond. She doesn't need to do anything with Sirius directly. She just needs to make the connection visible enough that the Wizengamot feels compelled to investigate the whole picture. Including us, Harry said. Including us, Tonks said. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Ptolemy moved along the table and stepped onto his arm and made his way up to Harry's shoulder with the methodical efficiency of someone who had decided he belonged there. Harry reached up automatically and the owlet bit his finger gently, which was apparently his version of affection. So the move, Harry said slowly, is to deal with Sirius before she can use him. The table went quiet. Deal with him how? Tonks said carefully. Find out if he did it, Harry said. If he didn't, get him out. He said it the way he said everything, not because he had worked out all the steps, but because the direction was clear and the direction was right and the steps would follow from the direction. If the case against him falls apart, Umbridge loses the angle. And if he's innocent, he stopped. If he's innocent, Andromeda said softly, then he's your godfather. Harry had known this was coming, had felt it assembling itself through the conversation, each piece placed with the particular inevitability of information arriving in the right order, but hearing it said directly still moved something in him. Not dramatically. Just quietly and considerably. Yes, he said. Tonks had her notebook out already, the shared one, and she was writing in it with the speed of someone getting ahead of their own thoughts. Amelia, she said without looking up. We need Amelia. If there's a legal mechanism for reopening the case, for requesting a formal review, she'd know it. She's been uncomfortable with how Sirius was processed for years. She told me once, when I first started the training program, that the Black case was one of several reasons she'd overhauled the DMLE's evidence standards. She said that to a trainee? Andromeda said. She said it to me specifically because I'm your daughter and she thought I might find it relevant, Tonks said. Amelia plays a long game and she picks who she talks to very carefully. She looked up from the notebook. I think she's been waiting for the right set of circumstances to reopen it. Are we the right set of circumstances? Harry said. Harry, Tonks said, we're a Metamorphmagus soul bond involving the boy who lived that walked into Diagon Alley and told Umbridge to her face that we could see through her. We are extremely the right set of circumstances. Ted appeared in the kitchen doorway with what appeared to be an entire pot of tea, assessed the mood of the room with the competence of long practice, set it on the table, and retreated without comment. Harry poured himself a cup and thought. The thing he kept coming back to was the image Andromeda had given him, Sirius Black at a wedding, the only family member who came because he wanted to, laughing and crying and taking up too much space in the best possible way. James Potter's best friend. The person who would have been, in a different version of the world, the person who raised Harry. He had spent 8 years in Azkaban. Whatever he was now, he had been that person first. Right, Harry said. Let's call Amelia. Amelia Bones arrived by Fleur that evening, because Amelia did not allow urgency to become drama but she did respond to it promptly, and she had clearly read the Prophet's coverage of yesterday's Diagon Alley visit with the professional attention she gave everything. She sat down at the kitchen table, accepted tea, looked at the open notebook between Harry and Tonks, and said, "You've been thinking about Sirius Black." "Since this morning," Harry said. "I've been thinking about Sirius Black since 1981, Amelia said. "Tell me where you've got to." They told her. She listened without interrupting, which was characteristic. Amelia absorbed information the way water absorbed dye, completely and with immediate, structural change. When they finished she was quiet for a long moment. "There is a mechanism," she said. "The Prisoner Review Act of 1962, which has never been successfully invoked, allows for the reopening of a case in which new evidence or a procedural violation can be demonstrated. Going to Azkaban without a trial is, unambiguously, a procedural violation." She looked at her tea. "The reason it has never been successfully invoked is that to invoke it you need the signature of 3 Wizengamot members and the support of the head of the DMLE. She looked up. "I am the head of the DMLE. And the 3 Wizengamot members? Tonks said. I have 2, Amelia said. Griselda Marchbanks and Edgar Trevelyan. Both of them have had private reservations about the Black case for years. Both of them will sign if I ask them with the right framing. She paused. The third is more difficult. Most of the Wizengamot are either afraid of opening the case because of what it might mean for the Ministry's credibility, or afraid of Umbridge's reaction, or both. What about Dumbledore? Andromeda said. Dumbledore is not a Wizengamot member currently in good standing, Amelia said. His standing is complex. He resigned several positions following a public disagreement with Fudge last year. She looked at Harry. There is one Wizengamot member who is genuinely independent of ministry pressure and who has a personal interest in this case. A pause. Arcturus Black. Andromeda went very still. Sirius's grandfather, she said. He's 94 years old, he's been retired from active Wizengamot business for 15 years, and he despises Fudge with a consistency that is, frankly, one of his more admirable qualities, Amelia said. He never accepted that Sirius was guilty. He spent 3 years trying to force a formal review in the early 80s before the ministry buried the attempt. He has not had the political leverage to try again since. She looked at Andromeda. He might have it now. If the right person asked him. He hates me, Andromeda said flatly. He hates that you married Ted, Amelia said. That's different. You're still a Black. You're the only Black in a position to approach him who is not currently incarcerated, dead, or Narcissa Malfoy. The silence had a particular quality. Mum, Tonks said. I know, Andromeda said. You don't have to, I know, Andromeda said again, differently this time, the way you say something when you mean I understand the choice and I've already made it, don't take it from me. She looked at Harry. He'll want to meet you, she said. Arcturus. He'll want to see Lily's boy. Then he can meet me, Harry said. It was arranged for 2 days later, which was the soonest Andromeda could establish contact through channels that bypassed the ministry's correspondence monitoring, because, as Tonks explained with the matter-of-fact tone she developed for explaining alarming things, the ministry had been monitoring the household's owl post since the Diagon Alley story ran, which was technically legal under an obscure wartime statute that Umbridge had apparently dusted off specifically for this purpose. In the interim, the Bond did something new. It started the morning after the conversation about Sirius, when Harry woke up at 3 in the morning from a dream he couldn't remember clearly, something cold, something that smelled like salt water and stone, something that left his chest feeling like it had been compressed. He sat up and his hands were luminous again, more than they'd been before, the warm light visible even in the dark. He sat with it for a moment, trying to understand what he was feeling. It wasn't his, or it wasn't only his. It was coming through the Bond, the harmonic carrying something with it, something that had the quality of very old, very heavy grief. He recognized it the way you recognize a key change in a piece of music, not intellectually, but physically, in the structure of your response to it. He got up, quietly, and went to Tonks's door. She was sleeping in her parents' old study now, which had a fold-out bed that she claimed was fine and which Ted had reinforced with a cushioning charm when she wasn't looking, and knocked softly. The door opened within 10 seconds, which meant she was already awake. You felt it too, he said. Yeah. Her hair was its sleeping color, a deep, unintentional violet, the color it went without her input. She looked at him and then at his hands. Your hands, I know. He held them up. The light was fading now, slowly, like an ember cooling. Something came through the Bond. Old and cold and, he stopped. Azkaban, he said. That's what it felt like. Tonks looked at him. Her expression was very careful. The Bond's deepening, she said. You know that. We've been tracking it. She opened the door wider. Come in. Sit down. He sat cross-legged on the floor. He preferred floors to chairs, had since the cupboard, where chairs hadn't been an option, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and they were quiet for a moment with the 3 in the morning quiet around them. The house settled into its nighttime sounds. "You think it's reaching serious," Harry said. "I think it's possible," Tonks said carefully. "The bond has a range we haven't tested. We know it can carry emotional and magical information between the two of us. But the Black family connection, Andromeda's bloodline, running through me through the bond, it's possible there's a resonance we didn't anticipate." She paused. "The books don't cover this specific configuration because this specific configuration hasn't existed before." "It was grief," Harry said. "Whatever came through. It was grief and something else." He thought about it. "Like someone remembering a person." Tonks said nothing. "If he's thinking about my father," Harry said, "then he hasn't given up. 8 years in Azkaban and he's still thinking about James." He looked at his hands, now almost ordinary, just the faintest trace of warmth in the palms. "I want to get him out." "We're working on it," Tonks said. "I know. I'm not being impatient." He looked at her. "I'm just telling you. It matters." "I know it matters," she said. "It matters to me too. Sirius was always, Mum used to talk about him." She stopped, looking at the middle distance for a moment. "She used to say he was the only cousin she had who made her feel like herself was enough. That he looked at her and Ted and he didn't see a scandal. He just saw his family." A pause. "She's been grieving him for 8 years alongside everything else." The two of them sat in the 3 o'clock quiet with that between them. "Right," Harry said eventually. "Get some sleep. We need Andromeda sharp for the Arcturus meeting." "Yes, Dad," Tonks said, with perfect delivery, and Harry's expression did the thing it did sometimes where the almost smile made it fully. He went back to his room. He did not go back to sleep for a while, lying under the star map with Ptolemy's small warm weight on the pillow next to his head, watching the glow-in-the-dark constellations and thinking about a man in a cold place, 8 years into darkness, remembering. Arcturus Black lived in a London townhouse on a square that announced its own exclusivity through sheer architectural confidence, the kind of building that expected to be taken seriously, all black iron railings and white stone, a front door that was dark as a lake in winter. Andromeda rang the bell and stood with the specific quality of someone who has rehearsed composure. He opened the door himself, which surprised Tonks and did not appear to surprise Andromeda. He was very old, older than Dumbledore looked, though not as old as Dumbledore was, with the Black family's signature bone structure, prominent and imperious, and silver hair cropped close to a head that still sat with absolute uprightness. He looked at Andromeda first, for a long moment, with an expression that moved through several things none of them were quite able to read. Then he looked at Harry. He was quiet for a long time. "Come in," he said. The house was not what Harry had expected. He'd anticipated something cold and formal, the magical pure-blood aesthetic as Andromeda had described it, all dark wood and portraits that talked, status performed through every surface. What he found instead was a house that had been lived in for a very long time by a person who had stopped caring what it looked like and started caring only about what it contained. There were books everywhere, not displayed but used, stacked and marked and annotated. A chess set on a table near the window mid-game, pieces arguing quietly with each other. A wizarding wireless in the corner playing something low and classical. Arcturus sat in a high-backed chair and looked at them and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which Tonks found agonizing and Harry found interesting. The old man was reading the room, reading them, doing something behind those sharp dark eyes. "Your lilies," he said to Harry. "The eyes." "Yes," Harry said. "And the bond." He looked at Tonks. "A Metamorphmagus soul bond. I read the theoretical literature on it twice, when I was young and found such things interesting. I never expected to see one." He looked at Tonks's hair, vivid pink in the sitting room's firelight, and something moved in his expression. "You're Andromeda's." "Yes," Tonks said. You look like her at that age, he said, to Andromeda. When you were angry about things. You used to have the same quality. He looked at his hands. I did not treat you well, he said, with the flat, unornamented quality of someone stating a fact. When you married. The family's response, I did not prevent it, and I should have. Andromeda's composure held. No, she said. You should have. I am saying so now, he said. I am 94. I have limited time for circumlocution. He looked at Harry. Amelia Bones has been in contact. She tells me you want to open the case. Yes, Harry said. Why? Arcturus said, with the directness of a man who wanted the real answer, not the diplomatic one. Because he's innocent, Harry said. I don't have proof yet. But I believe it. And because even if I'm wrong about that, he never got a trial. Everyone deserves a trial. He held Arcturus's gaze. And because he's my godfather, and I'd like to meet him. Arcturus looked at him for a long time. You know what it will cost, he said. Opening the case. The ministry will treat it as an attack. Fudge will be cornered, and a cornered fudge is capable of considerable damage. Umbridge will use every angle she has, Harry said. Yes. I know. He looked at the old man steadily. I'd rather fight them from the front than let them pick the ground. Arcturus was quiet. Then something in him moved, not physically, just in the quality of his stillness, a shift like a weight being set down. 3 signatures, he said. Amelia has 2. You need a third. We were hoping, Andromeda said carefully. I'll sign, Arcturus said simply. I've been wanting to sign something like this for a decade. I've simply been waiting for someone with enough standing to make the filing stick. He looked at Harry. You have standing, boy. More than you know. More than they've told you. His eyes dropped briefly to the scar. The bond makes it more complicated and more powerful simultaneously. The Wizengamot cannot ignore a petition backed by the head of the DMLE, 2 independent members, and the boy who survived Voldemort, whose own guardianship structure connects directly to the case in question. He looked at Tonks. And if your abilities are what the papers are suggesting, the papers are underestimating, Tonks said. The faintest thing that might have been approval crossed his face. Demonstrate, he said. Tonks looked at Harry. Harry nodded. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. When she opened them she was Arcturus Black, seated in the same chair, in the same posture, with the same precise set of the shoulders and the same sharp dark eyes. The detail was complete and instantaneous, down to the ring on the right hand, the slight asymmetry of the jawline, the particular quality of the gaze. She held it for 30 seconds, then released it and was herself again. Arcturus said nothing for a moment. The records say you can hold a transformation for 15 minutes maximum, he said. The bond changed the parameters, Harry said. She can hold it indefinitely now. He paused. We haven't tested the upper limit because we haven't found one yet. Arcturus looked at them both. Then he stood, crossed to a writing desk in the corner, took a quill, and signed his name to the document Amelia had sent ahead by Secure Owl. The petition goes to the Wizengamot Chief Warlock's office on Monday, he said. It will be assigned to a review committee within 2 weeks. The ministry will attempt to bury it in procedure. Amelia knows the counters. He turned. You should be prepared for Umbridge to move directly against the bond once the petition is filed. She'll frame it as a destabilizing magical influence, something that requires independent assessment. She's done it before with unusual magical phenomena. She'll try to separate you. The word separate dropped into the room. She can try, Tonks said. She has legal mechanisms, Arcturus said, without inflection. So do we, Harry said. More than we did 2 weeks ago. He looked at the old man. Thank you. For signing. And for, he stopped, trying to find the right words. For caring about him. For the last 8 years. Even when it cost you. Arcturus Black looked at him with those old, sharp eyes, and something in them was, not soft, not sentimental, but real. Unguarded. He was the best of us, Arcturus said. Whatever he did or didn't do, Sirius was the best thing this family produced in 200 years, and we threw him away. He straightened. I don't intend to do so twice. The petition was filed on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the ministry's response had arrived at the household in the form of an official letter, signed by Fudge himself, informing Tonks that her Auror training candidacy was being placed under administrative review pending the resolution of several outstanding procedural matters. The letter was 3 pages long and said nothing specific and everything general, which Tonks read once and then placed on the kitchen table in front of Harry with the expression of someone who has just been told a thing they already knew. She moved fast, Harry said. Faster than I expected, Tonks said. She didn't wait for the petition to even be formally received. She was monitoring the filing channels. She sat down. She's more plugged in than Amelia thought. This is her telling you to stand down, Harry said. Drop the petition, drop the case, come back in line or lose the career. Yes, Tonks said. Are you going to? Tonks looked at him. The question sat there between them, honest and direct, the way all their questions were, and she looked at him for long enough that it wasn't rhetorical anymore. No, she said. Then we need to be ready for whatever comes next, Harry said. He was already thinking about Amelia, about Arcturus, about what Umbridge's next move would be. He pulled the shared notebook toward him. She goes after your career through the training program because that's procedural and hard to challenge quickly. What else does she have? The guardianship could be challenged again, Tonks said. She'd need new grounds. The first attempt failed because Amelia blocked it, but if she reframes it, if she argues the bond itself constitutes an undue magical influence on a minor, then she needs a healer's assessment to back that claim, Harry said. Which takes time. We have time on that one. He wrote it down. What about the bond registration itself? Can she argue it needs to be formally assessed by the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures? That's, actually possible, Tonks said slowly. She's done it before with unusual magical phenomena, like Arcturus said. She classified a case of accidental animagus manifestation as a Class C magical creature event to get the person under RCMC jurisdiction. If she argues the bond is a unique magical entity, then we're both covered by the classification, Harry said. Which puts us under Ministry Regulatory Authority. They looked at each other. She's clever, Harry said. She's very clever, Tonks agreed. She just uses it entirely in service of things that are terrible. Andromeda appeared in the doorway, having apparently been listening from the kitchen with the strategic patience she deployed when she trusted the conversation to go where it needed to go without her involvement. There's something you both need to see, she said. She was holding a second letter, not official ministry stationery, something older, private, sealed with dark wax. She set it on the table. The seal was a dog running, a large, shaggy, black dog caught mid-stride. It came this morning, Andromeda said. By a method I don't fully understand. It came directly to me, not through the post, not by owl. It just appeared on my desk in the study. She looked at Harry. It's addressed to you. Harry picked it up. The handwriting on the outside was uneven, not the uneven of someone who wrote badly, but the uneven of someone who had not written anything in a very long time, the letters slightly irregular with the particular quality of hands that had been cold and difficult for years. His name was spelled correctly and carefully, and underneath his name, in smaller letters, if this reaches you, it means the old magic works both ways. His hands were doing the luminous thing again, warm and bright, the bond resonating with something that was coming through the paper itself. He opened it. The letter was short. 8 lines. He read it twice. Harry. I don't know if this is real. I've been thinking about your father so hard and for so long that sometimes I'm not sure what's the bond and what's just grief. But something changed 3 weeks ago. Something came through that felt like you. I didn't give them up. I need you to know that first, before anything else. I didn't give James and Lily to Voldemort. I made a mistake. I switched the secret keeper at the last moment, thinking I was being clever, thinking I was protecting them, and the person I trusted was the traitor. I have been living with that for 8 years. The Dementors take your happy memories. They can't take the true ones. I remember your father every day. If you can get me out, I'd like to meet my godson. Padfoot Harry read it a third time. Then he folded it very carefully and put it in his pocket, next to the photograph of his mother. He looked up. Tonks and Andromeda were watching him with the quality of people who understood that whatever was in the letter had weight, and who were waiting to take the weight with him rather than from him. He's innocent, Harry said. And he knows we're coming. He felt it, even as he said it, that cold, heavy resonance that had woken him at 3 a.m, the grief and the remembering. But threaded through it now, faint and warm and unmistakable, something that had not been there before. Hope. Actual, tentative, 8 years starved hope, alive in the frequency of the bond. Harry put his hand flat on the table. We need to talk to Amelia about accelerating the timeline, he said. And I want to talk to Dumbledore about what Sirius means by the secret keeper switch. There's something in that letter that changes the shape of what happened that night. He looked at Tonks. Are you with me? I've been with you since a cupboard on Privet Drive, Tonks said. Then let's move, Harry said. Chapter 5. What the Wizengamot fears. The letter changed things in ways Harry was still mapping when he went to bed that night, lying under the star map with Ptolemy tucked against his shoulder, turning Sirius's words over with the same careful attention he gave to anything that needed understanding before action. I switched the secret keeper at the last moment. He'd read it 4 times now. The sentence sat differently from the others, not the grief, not the innocence claim, but that specific admission of a choice made in the wrong direction. A mistake. Not treachery, not malice, but the particular catastrophe of being too clever, of trying to protect the people you loved by a method that destroyed them. Harry understood that shape of thing. He'd spent years calculating how to navigate the Dursley household by being invisible, by staying small, and every time the calculation failed, it failed spectacularly, and the failure was always worse than the thing he'd been trying to prevent. He understood Sirius's mistake in the way you understand something that lives in your own bones. He also understood that understanding it wasn't enough. The Wizengamot didn't care about the architecture of a terrible decision. The Wizengamot cared about evidence, procedure, the mechanics of what could be demonstrated versus what could be argued. And Sirius's letter, however real and however true, was not admissible anything. It was a piece of parchment that had appeared on a desk by unknown magical means, written by a man in Azkaban who had every reason to claim innocence regardless of guilt. Harry needed Peter Pettigrew. He came to this conclusion at midnight and went and knocked on Tonks's door. She opened it in 6 seconds, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd been thinking along the same lines. He came in and sat on the floor and said, "Pettigrew." She sat on the bed and said, "Yeah." "He's not dead," Harry said. Sirius said he switched the secret keeper, that Pettigrew was the traitor. If Pettigrew is alive and he's the real traitor, then he faked his death. Which means he's somewhere. Faking his death in front of 12 witnesses with a wand explosion is not easy, Tonks said. Unless you're an animagus, Harry said. Sirius called himself Padfoot. Informal animagus nickname. If Pettigrew had one too, if he could transform, a wand explosion in a crowded Muggle street, transform, disappear into the sewers. Nobody would be looking for a rat. Tonks looked at him in the dark of the study with an expression he was coming to recognize as the one where she caught up to a conclusion he'd reached and was deciding whether to be impressed or alarmed. He'd need somewhere to hide for 8 years, she said. Somewhere with access to magical news without exposure, Harry said. Somewhere he'd pass unnoticed. He paused. A wizarding family's pet. The silence was brief and absolute. That is, Tonks said slowly, genuinely extraordinary thinking for someone who's 9 years old. I'm 8, Harry said. You're almost 9, it's August. She grabbed the notebook from the side table. If Pettigrew is alive and hiding as an animagus rat in a wizarding household, finding him that's not a small task. There are thousands of wizarding families. But it narrows the field considerably if we're looking for a wizarding household that acquired a pet rat in the autumn of 1981, around the time of the explosion. Amelia, Harry said. Amelia, Tonks agreed, already writing. They worked until 2 in the morning, filling 6 pages of the notebook with the branching logic of it, what they knew, what they needed to prove, what evidence would satisfy a Wisengamot review committee, what wouldn't. Harry's handwriting got smaller as he got more focused, crowding the margins, and Tonks's got larger as she got more energized, sprawling across the lines, and the notebook by the time they stopped looked like a document produced by 2 people who were very different in every external way and completely aligned on the substance. Which was, Harry thought, a reasonably accurate description of them in general. Dumbledore, reached by Fleur the next morning, was quiet for a very long time after Harry laid out the Pettigrew theory. Then he said, I should have thought of this in 1981. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. I was grieving. And celebrating. And managing a great many things at once. Which is not an excuse. He looked older than usual in the green firelight of the Fleur connection, his face carrying something heavier than its normal weight. James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter were all unregistered animagi. I knew this. I had known since they were teenagers. I chose not to report it. At the time I considered it a minor matter compared to the war. A pause. It was not a minor matter. Remus Lupin, Harry said. He'd found the name in Andromeda's explanation of his parents, the 4th in the group, the werewolf, the one who had not been at the explosion, who had spent the years since in the grey edges of a world that didn't have a place for him. He'd know about Pettigrew. He was there for all of it. He would, Dumbledore said. Remus is not in a simple situation. The Ministry's restrictions on werewolves have made his life extremely difficult. He moves around. Keeps to himself. He looked at Harry through the flames. If I contact him, ask him to come here, Harry said. Ask him to tell us everything. Not for your benefit, not for the Ministry's. For Sirius. He held Dumbledore's gaze through the connection. Tell him Harry Potter would like to meet him. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. I will tell him, he said. The Wisengamot petition, meanwhile, had landed exactly as Arcturus predicted, like a stone through a greenhouse window. The Ministry's formal response arrived by official owl on Tuesday, a document dense with procedural language that Amelia translated for them overflew with the efficiency of someone reading a language she found both fluent and contemptible. Fudge was requesting a 30-day extension to allow the Ministry's own legal team to review the procedural question before the Wisengamot Committee was formally convened. Standard delay tactic, Amelia said. She'd filed a counter-petition invoking emergency review status on the grounds of ongoing rights violation. Sirius had now been held for 8 years without trial, and every additional day was an additional violation. The emergency status request was technically valid. Whether the Chief Warlock would grant it depended on politics more than law. The Chief Warlock was a wizard named Elphinstone Ackwart, 78 years old, appointed to the position by Fudge's predecessor, and he had the fundamental quality of someone who had survived a long time in a political structure by moving very carefully and upsetting nobody who could damage him. Amelia thought he was personally sympathetic but professionally cowardly. Arcturus thought he was a weathervane, and the question was what the dominant wind was. The dominant wind, Tonks argued, was public opinion. The prophet ran a follow-up yesterday, she said at breakfast on Wednesday, the paper open on the table. Not front page, page 3, but it's there, black petition filed, ministry under pressure over untrailed prisoner. The journalist is actually doing research, which is unusual. There are 2 quotes from people who were at the original arrest who are now questioning the official account. That's not accidental, Andromeda said, looking at the paper. Someone is feeding the prophet information. Arcturus, Harry said. Andromeda looked up. He's been waiting to do something with this for 15 years, Harry said. He just needed the petition to give him cover. The moment it was filed he had standing to talk to people without it looking like a senile old man relitigating something that hurt him. He looked at the article. He's smart. He's using us as the lightning rod and doing his own work at the same time. I like him, Tonks said. I find him deeply complicated, Andromeda said, but the way she said it held a note of something that was not entirely unlike agreement. Remus Lupin arrived on Thursday. He came to the back door, which Harry had not expected, had expected the flu, or an owl, or the kind of deliberate formal entry that Amelia and Dumbledore favored. Instead Andromeda said, simply, at breakfast, he's in the garden, and they all looked out the kitchen window at a man standing near the rosemary bush with his hands in his coat pockets, very still, looking at the house with an expression Harry couldn't read at that distance. He was younger than Harry had expected, mid-30s, probably, though he looked older because of how he was wearing the years. He was thin in a way that was different from Harry's thin, the thin of someone chronically not quite well rather than chronically not quite fed, and his clothes were clean but worn, and his hair was brown-gray already at his temples despite the age. There were scars on his face and hands that had the particular pattern of something recurring over a long time. He looked up and saw Harry in the window and went very still for a different reason. Harry went to the back door and opened it. They looked at each other across the garden for a moment. "You're James's," Lupin said. His voice was quiet and careful, with a warmth in it that he was not performing, it was just there, the way warmth is in people who haven't managed to lose it despite having been given reasonable cause to. "And Lily's," Harry said. Something in Lupin's face did something complicated. "Yes," he said. "And Lily's. She'd want the credit first." He looked at Harry steadily. "You said you wanted to meet me." "Come in," Harry said. "There's tea and we have a lot to talk about." Lupin sat at the kitchen table and he talked. He talked for 2 hours, in that quiet careful voice that got less careful and less quiet as the conversation went on, as the kitchen's warmth and Ted's unstudied hospitality and the simple fact of being listened to without agenda did what those things do to people who have been without them for a long time. He told them about the Marauders, James and Sirius and Peter and himself, for boys who had been inseparable for 7 years, who had become animagi for him, for the werewolf in the group, so that he would have company during the full moon rather than isolation. He told them about Voldemort's rise and the war, the paranoia, the way trust had eroded until they couldn't be sure of anything. He told them about the plan to make Pettigrew the secret keeper, Sirius's idea, a last-minute switch, the logic of it being that Pettigrew was the least suspected, the most overlooked. He told them about the night it fell apart. He'd been at a safe house in Scotland for the full moon. He'd come back to find James and Lily dead, Sirius arrested, Pettigrew apparently killed. He'd believed it. He'd had no reason not to. He had spent 8 years believing it. Then he looked at Harry and said, "Your letter said Sirius believes Pettigrew is alive." "Yes," Harry said. "And I think Sirius is right." He explained the Animagus theory, the rat transformation, the disappearance into a wizarding household's pet population. He watched Lupin's face as he explained it, the way understanding assembled itself behind those careful eyes, the way old grief and new horror and something like fury moved through him in succession. "Peter had a rat form," Lupin said, very quietly, when Harry finished. "Wormtail. That was his Animagus name." The kitchen was very still. "If he's been hiding in a wizarding household for 8 years, Lupin said, then someone has been sheltering him." Whether they know it or not. He looked at the table. He'll know about the petition. If the prophet has it, he'll know. If he's been living in a wizarding household reading wizarding news, he'll know Sirius's case is being reopened. His jaw was tight. He'll run. Not if we find him first, Harry said. How? Lupin said. We can't search every wizarding household in Britain for an animagus rat. We can use the bond, Tonks said. Everyone looked at her. She was looking at Harry with the expression she had when an idea was assembling itself faster than she could quite articulate it. The bond gives me a level of transformative detection it's not in any registry, it's not something the ministry has documentation on, but I can sense transformations. Magical disguises, animagus forms, there's a quality to them that's different from natural magical signatures. I've been aware of it since the bond deepened. She looked at Amelia, who had arrived that morning and was sitting at the end of the table with her tea and her monocle and her professionally opaque expression. I've been able to detect it within about 50 feet. An unregistered animagus, held in a transformed state for 8 years, would have a very specific kind of magical compression. If I were close enough, you'd feel it, Harry said. I'd feel it, she said. Amelia set down her tea. That's not a standard Auror capability, she said. No, Tonks said. It's a bond capability. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then, if we can produce Pettigrew, alive, in his human form, with verified magical identification, the Wizengamot case becomes unassailable. Not just for Sirius. For everything. She looked at Harry. It would also demonstrate the bond's utility in a way that makes Umbridge's regulatory arguments extremely difficult to sustain. It shows the bond serves justice rather than threatening it, Harry said. Precisely, Amelia said. What about the hearing? Andromeda said. The Wizengamot committee convenes in 8 days. We need Pettigrew before the hearing, Amelia said. Or we need to stall the hearing long enough to produce him. She looked at the table, at the assembled faces, Harry, Tonks, Andromeda, Lupin, Ted quiet at the edge with his tea. I can delay the ministry's procedural motions for 4 more days. After that, the hearing proceeds on their terms. She looked at Harry. That gives us 4 days to find Peter Pettigrew. Right, said Harry. He opened the notebook to a fresh page. Let's start with known wizarding families in the southeast who acquired rats in late 1981. They worked through the day and into the evening, Amelia cross-referencing ministry records of magical household registrations, Lupin providing details of Pettigrew's known associates and the social circles that would have been accessible to him in animagus form, Tonks mapping the detection radius of her bond-enhanced senses against the geography of likely hiding places. Harry coordinated, sitting at the center of the table with the notebook, building the logic structure from what they knew outward into what they could find. On the second day, it was Lupin who thought of the Weasleys. He said it tentatively, the way he said things he wasn't sure about, with care, as though the idea itself might be fragile. The Weasleys are a large wizarding family, very social, well connected to the old networks Pettigrew ran in. They live in Devon, the borough, they call it. I believe they have a great many children, which would make an overlooked rat entirely plausible. He paused. I knew Arthur Weasley slightly. He's a good man. He wouldn't have known. But if Peter found his way into that household, he'd have perfect cover, Tonks said. Family pet in a house with 6 or 7 children. Nobody looks too closely at a rat in that situation. Do you know the family? Amelia said to Lupin. Not well enough to contact them without explanation, he said. But Arthur is at the ministry. Arthur Weasley, Department of Misuse of Muggle Artifacts. Amelia, I know Arthur, Amelia said. I'll make contact. I'll keep it procedurally framed, routine animagus registration check, nothing that would alarm a rat who reads the papers. She looked at Tonks. If you need to be there in person, I need to be there in person, Tonks said. They went to the burrow on the third day. It was an extraordinary house. Harry could see that before they even got through the gate, a building that appeared to have been assembled by someone who treated architecture as a creative suggestion rather than a constraint, floors stacked at angles that shouldn't have held, extensions running in directions that defied the original structure's logic, a garden full of gnomes who regarded visitors with the hostile confidence of homeowners. It should have looked unstable. It looked, instead, deeply and specifically itself, the way some things are, the physical expression of a personality, in this case a personality that was warm and chaotic and completely uninterested in what anyone thought about it. Arthur Weasley met them at the door, a tall, kind-faced man with thinning red hair and the expression of someone who had agreed to host an Amelia Bones procedural visit without quite understanding why and was being cheerful about it out of fundamental good nature. He had 6 children visible at various points in and around the house, ranging from teenagers to a small red-haired boy of about Harry's age who looked at Harry with unabashed interest from the end of the hall. Harry looked back. The boy had freckles and a gap in his front teeth and the look of someone who was interested in most things. "Hi," Harry said. "Hi," the boy said. "Are you Harry Potter?" "Ron," Arthur said. "What?" "He is, isn't he?" Ron Weasley looked entirely unrepentant. "His hair's right and Mum said he was coming and, it's fine," Harry said. He looked at Ron. "Yes." Ron's face did something enthusiastic that involved most of his freckles. "Brilliant," he said, with complete sincerity. Harry almost smiled. Actually, the kind that reached his eyes without requiring any kind of decision. They were taken inside, and the inside of the burrow was everything the outside promised, warm and cramped and full, with the particular quality of a house where everything was loved rather than owned. The kitchen smelled extraordinary. There were clock hands pointing to home for 6 children and 2 adults. A radio was playing something that argued back occasionally. Tonks was very still the moment they stepped inside. Harry felt it through the bond, the attention sharpening, the focus narrowing, the detection sense she described activating with an immediacy that pulled at the harmonic between them. He looked at her. She was looking at the corner of the kitchen, where a fat grey rat was sitting on a shelf beside a collection of mismatched mugs, very still in the way animals go still when they sense a predator. The rat's eyes were small and slightly too intelligent for a rat. Tonks looked at Harry. Harry looked at the rat. The rat looked at Harry and then bolted. What happened next was fast enough that the Weasley children, several of whom were present, would describe it later with varying degrees of accuracy and unanimous enthusiasm. Tonks moved first, not running, transforming, shifting as she ran so that by the time she reached the door the rat had slipped under. She had changed her hand into a form that could get under it too, and Harry was a step behind her, and the bond was running hot between them, feeding her the stability she needed to hold the transformation in motion rather than stillness. And the rat hit the garden at a run that was faster than rats usually ran because Peter Pettigrew had had 8 years to perfect his animagus endurance. But Tonks had the bond. She caught him at the edge of the garden, 2 hands closing around a struggling grey rat, and Harry put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Transform him back," and Tonks looked at the rat and the bond surged between them, a wave of warm bright power, and Tonks said a word that was not a standard spell but was something older and more fundamental, something from the magical theory books rather than any curriculum, a reversal forcing word that worked on transformation at the root level. Peter Pettigrew appeared in the Weasley garden, short and balding and wide-eyed, with a hand missing a finger that had been cut off to fake his death, wearing clothes that hadn't been washed since 1981 and an expression of absolute, complete, cornered terror. Arthur Weasley, who had followed them into the garden and was standing at the door of his house, said, "Good Lord." Amelia Bones said, "Peter Pettigrew, you are under arrest by the authority of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for the crimes of," and listed them, briskly and completely, while extracting magical restraints from her robes with the efficiency of someone who had brought them for exactly this contingency. Harry stood in the Weasley garden and looked at Peter Pettigrew and felt, not triumph, exactly. Not satisfaction. Something quieter and harder to name. The specific feeling of a piece of evidence stepping into the place in a logical structure where it was needed. Pettigrew was crying. "You don't understand," he was saying, in a high, wet voice. "He'd have killed me, I had no choice, I had to, he would have killed me, you let Sirius take the blame," Harry said. Not loudly. Just clearly, with the simple directness of a fact. "For 8 years." Pettigrew looked at him. Something in the man's face was genuinely afraid in the way that wasn't performed, the way that came from encountering something you couldn't calculate around. A 9-year-old boy in a Devon garden who was looking at you with green eyes and no anger and absolute clarity. "I had no choice," Pettigrew said again. "You always had a choice," Harry said. "You made the one that kept you alive instead of the one that was right." He looked at Amelia. "I'm done talking to him." The Wizengamot hearing was in 6 days. The day before it, Umbridge made her move. It came not as a letter this time but as a formal ministry decree, delivered in person by 3 ministry officials to the Tonks household at 8 in the morning, a document invoking the Magical Regulation of Unusual Phenomena Act, under which the ministry claimed authority to conduct a mandatory assessment of the soul bond and both parties to it, pending which all public activities relating to the bond were to be suspended and both Harry and Tonks were to report to St. Mungo's for independent healer evaluation. The document was signed by Fudge. Countersigned by Umbridge. And it was, Amelia confirmed by urgent flew within the hour, technically legal. "Technically," Tonks said. "The act is real," Amelia said. "It's been applied to genuinely dangerous magical phenomena, cursed objects, uncontrolled magical events, wild magic outbreaks. Using it for a soul bond is a stretch, but it's within the possible interpretation of the statute." She looked tired in a way Harry hadn't seen before, not defeated, just tired the way people get when they have been fighting something for a long time on multiple fronts. "If we refuse and the Wizengamot hearing proceeds with this decree active, Umbridge can argue the committee is evaluating a bond that is legally classified as an unassessed phenomenon, which gives the ministry grounds to intervene in the proceedings. She's trying to make the hearing about us instead of Sirius," Harry said. "Yes," Amelia said. "If we comply, we lose 4 days minimum at St. Mungo's, the hearing proceeds without us, and Pettigrew's arrest becomes a procedural matter rather than the central evidence." He thought through the branches of it. "If we refuse, she uses the refusal to contaminate the hearing." He looked at the decree. "She's been planning this since Diagon Alley. Possibly since before. She knew the petition would bring us here and she had this ready." "Yes," Amelia said again, with the quality of professional respect for an opponent that doesn't preclude absolute opposition to them. Harry sat back. Tonks was reading the decree, her hair the flat dark red it went when she was very focused, cycling through nothing because all her attention was on the problem. She set it down and looked at Harry. "What if we comply?" she said. "On our terms." He looked at her. "The decree requires a healer evaluation," she said. "It doesn't specify the timeline. It doesn't specify which healer. And it doesn't prevent the Wizengamot hearing from proceeding." She looked at Amelia. "Can we file for an expedited evaluation?" 2 days, named healer, no ministry-appointed assessor. "You'd need the healer to agree to the timeline," Amelia said. "I know someone," Andromeda said from the doorway. Of course she did. The evaluation happened the next morning, in Amelia's office rather than St. Mungo's, with a healer named Strout who had been Andromeda's classmate and who had, in 30 years of practice, encountered several things the ministry would have preferred to classify as phenomena and had instead classified as extremely interesting medical cases that the patient has a right to understand. She was thorough and she was fast, and at the end of 2 hours she produced a 6-page document that concluded, in language both precise and pleasingly final, that the soul bond between Harry James Potter and Nymphadora Tonks represented a stable, voluntary, mutually beneficial magical structure presenting no risk to either party or to the public, and that attempts to administratively interfere with said bond would constitute a direct medical intervention against the recommendation of the certifying healer. The document was filed with the Wizengamot's chief warlock's office by midday. Umbridge's decree was, legally, satisfied. Harry looked at the clock. The hearing was in 18 hours. He went upstairs, sat at his desk under the window, and opened on the nature of paired magic to the chapter on historical bonds. He read for 2 hours, not because he needed more information, but because reading settled him, gave his mind somewhere organized to be while the rest of him processed what tomorrow meant. Lupin knocked at 7. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Harry with those careful, warm eyes, and said, "Are you all right?" "I think so," Harry said. "I'm not afraid of the hearing." He stopped. "Sirius is still in Azkaban tonight." "Yes," Lupin said. "He's been in there since I was 15 months old. He's been in there carrying the knowledge of what actually happened and having no way to make anyone hear it." Harry looked at his hands. "I've been here for 6 weeks and he's been in there for 8 years, and tomorrow we walk into a room and explain it to people who should have figured it out 8 years ago." Lupin was quiet for a moment. "I should have figured it out 8 years ago," he said. "I believed what I was told. I was grieving and I was frightened and I believed it." He looked at Harry steadily. "That is something I carry." "It's not the same as Pettigrew," Harry said. "No," Lupin agreed. "It's not. But it is something." He looked at the star map on the ceiling for a moment. "Your father would have broken down the ministry doors already," he said, with a quality that was both fond and accurate. "He'd have done it the first week and got himself arrested for it." "That sounds counterproductive," Harry said. "Profoundly," Lupin agreed. "He was extraordinary and completely disastrous in equal measure." He paused. "Your mother, on the other hand, would have done exactly what you're doing. Built the case, gathered the people, walked into the room prepared. He stopped. "She was the most thorough person I've ever known. She cared about getting it right more than getting it fast, even when waiting cost her." Harry looked at the star map. "The hearing tomorrow," Lupin said. "I'll be there. I've given a formal statement already, Amelia took it this morning. About the Marauders, about Pettigrew, about the Secret Keeper switch." He looked at Harry. "Whatever you need from me in that room, I'll do." "Just tell the truth," Harry said. "That's all." The Wizengamot courtroom was underground. Harry had known this intellectually from Andromeda's descriptions, but the reality of it, the stone stairs descending, the torchlight, the cold quality of the air that said this is a place built for wait, was different from the concept. They arrived early, which was Andromeda's doing. She believed in knowing a space before a space knew you, and she walked them through the outer corridors of the ministry's lower levels with the manner of someone who had been in worse rooms for worse reasons and found them navigable. The courtroom was circular, banked with stone seats rising in tiers around a central floor where a single chair sat with chains attached. Harry looked at the chair and said nothing about it. Tonks's hair went very flat and dark for a moment, then recovered. Andromeda looked at the chair and looked away. The Wizengamot members filed in over 20 minutes, dozens of them, in plum robes, the mix of ages and expressions representing the full range of British magical politics. Amelia sat to the left of the chief warlock's elevated bench. Arcturus was in the members' seats, his silver head upright, watching the room with the attention of someone who had done their work and was now waiting to see the result. Lupin was in the witness enclosure. Dumbledore was in the gallery, not as a participant but as a presence, and Dumbledore as a presence was considerable enough that several Wizengamot members glanced at him when they entered. Umbridge was there. Front row of the gallery, pink cardigan, that installed smile, those pale eyes already on Harry when he came in. Harry looked at her and then looked away and did not look back. She did not merit more than that acknowledgement. Ackwart, the chief warlock, called the session to order with the air of a man who had spent considerable time deciding which way the wind was blowing and had arrived at this room knowing the answer but hoping someone else would confirm it. He was old and careful and not particularly brave, but he was, as Arcturus had assessed, fundamentally a weathervane, and the weather had shifted. The session opened with Amelia presenting the procedural violation. She did it in 12 minutes, which was remarkable for a document that covered 8 years of injustice, but Amelia had always believed that precision served truth better than volume. Sirius Black had been arrested, transported to Azkaban, and held without trial, in violation of 3 separate statutes. The violation was not ambiguous. The question of his guilt or innocence was separate from the violation and would need to be addressed in a separate proceeding if the Wizengamot voted to release him pending that proceeding. Then came Pettigrew. He was brought in under guard, and the room's atmosphere changed the moment he appeared, a collective intake, a shift in the quality of attention, the particular silence that falls when something appears that forces a reassessment of a known story. He looked small and frightened and shabby, and he said nothing until he was placed in the witness position and cautioned, and then he talked. He talked the way he had in the Weasley garden, in that high, wet voice, but this time he was under Veritaserum administered by a ministry-certified potions master in front of the full Wizengamot, and Veritaserum did not permit evasion. He told them about Voldemort's approach, the offer made, the threat behind the offer. He told them about agreeing to spy. He told them about carrying the Potter's location, about giving it up, about cutting off his own finger and casting the explosion before transforming and running. He told them about 8 years in the Weasley household. He told them about every choice he had made, in the voice of someone who could not, chemically, avoid telling the truth. The room was absolutely silent by the end of it. Then Lupin spoke. Then Arcturus. Then Amelia again, presenting the bond and the manner in which Pettigrew had been found, with Tonks's testimony about the detection capability the bond had provided. She did not sensationalize it. She presented it as evidence, which was exactly what it was. Urquhart called for the vote on the procedural release. It was 63 in favor to 12 against. Sirius Black would be released pending a formal trial, which the Wizengamot had simultaneously voted to schedule for 3 weeks' time. Harry sat in the gallery and watched the vote numbers go up on the enchanted tally above the Chief Warlock's bench, and he felt, through the bond, through the harmonic, through whatever channel had carried cold and grief to him at 3 in the morning across the distance between Hertfordshire and the North Sea, a shift. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It was simply that whatever had been there before, the heavy, cold, compressed weight of 8 years of unrelenting darkness, moved. Not gone. But different. Less constant, less total, something changing shape. He thought, Sirius felt that. Tonks's hand found his in the gallery, briefly, and she squeezed once and let go. It was not over. The trial was in 3 weeks. Umbridge was still sitting in the front row with her installed smile and her pale eyes, and she was already speaking quietly to someone beside her with the manner of someone planning rather than conceding. The fight for Harry's freedom from ministry interference hadn't been won by today, it had been advanced. But 63 to 12. Sirius Black was coming home. Harry let out a breath that he hadn't known he was holding, and looked at the tally board, and thought about a man in a cold place feeling something warm arrive, sudden and real, after 8 years of nothing. Chapter 6, Family, Blood, and Fire. The night before Sirius was released, Harry couldn't sleep. He lay under the star map and watched the ceiling and listened to the house settle around him, Ted's steady footsteps crossing to the bathroom and back, the particular creak of the 3rd stair that Tonks always skipped but Harry had never managed to memorize in time, Ptolemy's small breathing on the pillow beside him. The house was asleep. Harry was not. He kept thinking about what Lupin had told him, quietly, in the kitchen 2 days after the hearing, when the procedural machinery had been set in motion and there was briefly nothing to do but wait. He'd told Harry that Sirius, in the first months after James and Lily died, before Azkaban, had sat outside the Potter's destroyed house in Godric's Hollow for an entire night. Just sat there. Not trying to get in, not doing anything. Just, sitting, in the rubble and the cold, because he couldn't make himself leave the last place they'd been. Then Hagrid had come to collect Harry, on Dumbledore's instruction, and Sirius had handed him over on his motorbike and ridden away and been arrested 6 hours later. He'd never said goodbye. Harry thought about this with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that couldn't be fixed, only understood. He couldn't give Sirius the goodbye back. He couldn't restore the 8 years. What he could do was be there when the gates opened, which was tomorrow at 9 in the morning by Amelia's schedule, and that would have to be the thing it was rather than the thing it should have been in a better version of events. He fell asleep just before 3 and woke at 6 to Ptolemy walking on his face with the unhurried confidence of someone who considered this an entirely reasonable alarm mechanism. Tonks was already in the kitchen when he came downstairs, both hands around a mug, her hair an unsettled mixture of purple and orange that suggested she hadn't been sleeping much either. Ted was at the hob. Andromeda was at the table with a book open in front of her that she was not reading. Nobody said much. They ate breakfast in the warm quiet of people who had been through something together and were now waiting at the end of it. Amelia had arranged the release for the Ministry's internal dock rather than Azkaban itself. Sirius would be transported by Auror escort to London, formally processed out of Ministry custody, and then released into the custody of his provisional legal guardian pending the trial. The provisional guardian question had been an administrative wrangle that Arcturus had resolved with characteristic efficiency by volunteering himself, on the grounds that he was a Wisengamot member in good standing and Sirius's closest living blood relative on the paternal line and entirely prepared to argue the point with anyone who wanted to raise it. Nobody had wanted to raise it. Harry, Tonks, Andromeda, and Lupin arrived at the Ministry at 8:30. Arcturus was already there, standing in the atrium with the uprightness of a man who had been waiting for this for 15 years and was not going to be caught sitting down when it arrived. He looked at Harry when they came through the flue and nodded once, the nod of someone acknowledging that the work had been done and that the person in front of him was the primary reason it had been. Dumbledore was there. He stood slightly apart from the group, which Harry understood was deliberate. This was not Dumbledore's moment to occupy, and he knew it, and he was choosing the edges rather than the center with a conscious care that was perhaps the most self-aware thing Harry had seen him do. He caught Harry's eye and said nothing. Harry nodded. Umbridge was not there. This was notable in the way that an expected sound failing to occur is notable. Tonks had said, the evening before, that Umbridge's absence from the release would mean she was deploying whatever she had left from a different angle, and that the absence was more alarming than the presence would have been. Harry agreed. He kept it filed. At 9:02, the doors from the Ministry's lower levels opened. Sirius Black walked through them. Harry had tried to prepare himself for this, had assembled what he knew, the description Andromeda had given, Lupin's account, the handful of photographs in wizarding publications that showed a young man with dark hair and a wide, reckless grin. He had built a picture from the components. The picture was wrong, which he had expected, but the specific way it was wrong was something he had not been able to anticipate. Sirius was thin. Very thin, in a way that was visible even through the clean robes someone had provided for the release, the kind of thin that meant the body had been running on bare minimum for years and the years had accumulated. His dark hair was long and tangled and had gray in it that had not been there 8 years ago. His face had the particular quality of someone who had aged several decades in 8 years, not old, not even close to old, but marked, as though the time had been pressed into the structure of him at an accelerated rate. But he walked through those doors and he held his head up, and his eyes, gray, the Black family gray, sharp and light and ferociously alive, swept the room with a speed and attention that said whatever Azkaban had done to his body it had not reached the essential thing, the irreducible core of Sirius Black that was evidently made of something the Dementors couldn't metabolize. Those eyes found Harry. They stopped. The room went very still in the way rooms do when something is happening that everyone present understands is significant, not a performance of significance, not the staged weight of official occasions, but the real kind, the spontaneous quiet that falls when truth takes up physical space. Sirius walked across the atrium. He walked the way he must have walked before Azkaban, with a loose, long-legged stride that suggested someone accustomed to moving through the world at his own pace, and he stopped 3 feet in front of Harry and looked at him, and his expression was doing several things simultaneously that were all too complicated to resolve into one readable emotion. Harry looked back. "You have her eyes," Sirius said. His voice was rougher than Harry had imagined, scraped thin by years of disuse and cold. "I know," Harry said. "You're the third person to tell me that." Something moved in Sirius's face. "And James's hair," he said. "Apparently. The complete disaster hair. Every direction at once. He was 20 years old before he gave up trying to comb it." A pause. The complicated thing in his expression was resolving slowly, like a photograph developing, grief and joy and something raw and enormous that had been compressed for 8 years under pressure and was now expanding at a rate that was almost visible. "I got your letter," he said. "I got yours," Harry said. "I wasn't sure it would work. The magic through the bond, I didn't know if the connection was strong enough." "It was," Harry said. He looked at Sirius steadily, the same green-eyed direct look he'd given Vernon Dursley and Dolores Umbridge and Albus Dumbledore, the look he'd developed in 6 weeks of deciding who he was, the look that was just himself. "I believed you. Before the evidence. I believed the letter." Sirius looked at him for a moment. "Why?" Harry thought about it. "Because of what you said about the mistake. That you were trying to be clever and it went wrong." He paused. "Guilty people don't apologize for their tactics. They justify them." Sirius made a sound that was almost a laugh, not the hollow, slightly unhinged laugh that the accounts of his arrest had described, but something genuine, surprised out of him. "James used to say you could always tell a Gryffindor because they were the ones apologizing after they'd already got you into the thing that needed apologizing for." "Were you a Gryffindor?" "Wasn't supposed to be," Sirius said. "The Sorting Hat had about 6 seconds of very strong opinions about Slytherin before I told it where it could put those opinions." Harry almost smiled. "What did it say?" "It said I had a point and put me in Gryffindor, which tells you something about the Hat's character." Sirius looked at him. Then, with the directness of someone who had been planning to say something for as long as the letter took to arrive, "I'm sorry. For all of it. For not being there. For the mistake. For," he stopped. "The cupboard isn't your fault," Harry said. Sirius flinched. "Small, but there." "It isn't," Harry said again. "You were in Azkaban. You didn't know. When Dumbledore made the decision to put me there, you were already gone." He looked at Sirius and let the look carry what it needed to. "I don't need you to apologize for things you couldn't control. I need you to be here now." The atrium was still very quiet. Lupin, standing nearby, had the expression of someone who had been bracing for impact for 20 minutes and was discovering the impact was not the kind he'd prepared for. Andromeda had her hand pressed against her mouth, not quite covering the particular set of her face. Even Arcturus, standing straight and silent to one side, had something in his expression that was not quite softness but was, perhaps, the memory of it. "I'm here," Sirius said, and the roughness in his voice had something in it now that had not been there before. "Good," Harry said. "Then come and meet Tonks properly. She's the reason any of this happened, so you should probably thank her first." Tonks, who had been standing 2 feet to Harry's left in a state of what Harry recognized as carefully managed emotion, pink hair slightly more vivid than usual, eyes doing the thing they did when she was refusing to cry on the grounds that she'd decided not to, said, "You don't have to thank me." "I absolutely do," Sirius said, looking at her with those gray eyes that were assessing and warm simultaneously. "You're Andromeda's. I can see it." He looked at Andromeda. Andromeda had crossed the atrium without Harry noticing her move, and she stopped in front of Sirius with the composed, direct quality she brought to everything, and Sirius looked at her, and something in the look between them was a conversation that had been waiting 8 years to happen, not simple, not uncomplicated, not without the residue of grief and loss and the specific pain of a family that had destroyed itself, but real. True. Andromeda put her arms around him. Sirius closed his eyes. They stood there in the ministry atrium for a long moment and nobody said anything, and Harry looked away and found that Lupin had also looked away, both of them giving the moment the privacy it deserved. Then Sirius said, muffled, "You smell like your garden." "I was gardening this morning," Andromeda said. "The roses have opinions about the occasion." "Aggressive ones?" "Enthusiastic ones. It's better than it sounds." Sirius laughed again, and this time it was fully itself, warm and slightly uncontrolled, the laugh of someone who had been keeping it somewhere it didn't fit for too long, and Harry heard what it must have sounded like before Azkaban and understood why people who loved Sirius had described him as filling rooms. It was the best sound in the ministry atrium by a considerable margin. They were at the exit, the group of them moving toward the Floo network, when the thing Tonks had been anticipating happened. It came from the left corridor, 3 ministry officials in plum robes, moving with the particular quality of people executing rather than initiating, and behind them, small and wide and wearing that fixed smile like armor, Dolores Umbridge. She was holding a document. "Mr. Black," she said, in the icing voice, addressing Sirius with the particular sweetness of someone who has calibrated the tone to sound like concern while delivering a threat. "What a remarkable day. We are all so very pleased." The smile. The still, cold eyes. "I wonder if I might have a moment." "No," said Sirius. Umbridge blinked. She had not expected that, Harry thought, had expected the disorientation of a man just out of Azkaban, the vulnerability of someone still finding his feet in a world that had moved on without him. Sirius had had approximately 8 minutes of freedom and was already categorically himself. "There is the matter of the Provisional Guardianship Review," Umbridge said, pivoting smoothly. "The Ministry has some concerns about the arrangement, given Mr. Black's recent circumstances." She looked at Arcturus. "With respect." "With respect," Arcturus said, "the arrangement has been confirmed by the Wizengamot. Your concerns are not relevant. The Ministry's senior undersecretary's concerns are not the Wizengamot's concerns," Arcturus said. He was 94 years old and he had several centuries of accumulated black family weight in the way he said it, and Umbridge's officials took a small collective step back that she did not appear to notice. "Harry." Umbridge turned to him, and the smile went somewhere different, softer, more targeted. "Harry, dear. I know this all feels very settled. But there are so many questions still. The bond, Sirius's trial, the question of your education and your welfare, my welfare," Harry said. "Of course. Our primary concern has always been, your primary concern has been keeping me in a context where the Ministry controls what I know about myself and what I can do," Harry said. "We've had this conversation. The version in Diagon Alley was more public, but the content is the same." He looked at her directly. "You've tried the emergency guardianship petition. You've tried the career suspension. You've tried the Magical Regulation of Unusual Phenomena Act. You've tried running out the clock on the hearing. None of them worked." He paused. "What's in the document?" Umbridge's smile did not move. "The document," she said, "is a petition to the Wizengamot for a formal assessment of the soul bond's influence on a minor. Specifically, the question of whether an 8-year-old child can meaningfully consent to a soul bond and whether said bond might be categorized as a form of undue magical influence requiring independent review." She looked at Tonks. "We have the signatures of 4 healers who are prepared to testify that the developmental implications of such a bond on a child of Harry's age warrant." 7, said a voice. Everyone looked. The voice belonged to Healer Strout, who had appeared from the floor behind them with the timing of someone who had been informed of this particular angle and had prepared for it. She was holding her own document. "I have 7 counter-signatures from healers, including 3 from the International Confederation of Wizards Medical Advisory Board, who have reviewed the bond assessment I conducted and are prepared to testify to its stability, voluntariness, and positive developmental implications." She handed the document to Amelia without breaking stride. Good morning, Dolores. Umbridge looked at the document in Amelia's hand. The 4 healers on your petition, Amelia said, are all ministry employed, all in departments under direct senior undersecretary oversight. Their independence as expert witnesses is, she paused with precise consideration, worth examining. This is obstruction, Umbridge said, and for the first time the icing was thin over something that was genuinely angry, not performed outrage but the real, cold anger of someone who has had a plan and watched it fail repeatedly. The ministry has a right and a duty to, the ministry, said Sirius Black, stepping forward with a looseness in his movement that suggested he had been conserving something for this specific moment, put me in Azkaban for 8 years for something I did not do. Don't talk to me about rights and duties. He looked at Umbridge with the direct, unimpressed gaze of a man who had spent 8 years with Dementors and found Dolores Umbridge a manageable downgrade. Harry doesn't need the ministry's protection. He's done more in 6 weeks to protect himself, and me, and a great many other people, than the ministry managed in 8 years. He looked at the document in her hand. File it. The Wizengamot will need something to do after they finish with Pettigrew. Umbridge looked at Sirius. Then at Harry. Then at the assembled group, Amelia, Arcturus, Andromeda, Tonks, Lupin, Dumbledore at the edge of things, Healer Strout with her counter-petition. She looked at the document in her own hand and at the document in Amelia's, and she did a calculation that was visible in the fractional tightening around her still eyes, a calculation that landed somewhere she did not enjoy. She lowered the document. We will be watching, she said. We know, Harry said. She turned and walked away, her officials reorganizing themselves around her with the slightly desperate efficiency of people closing ranks after a loss, and she went back down the left corridor, and the atrium returned to its normal volume as though nothing had happened. Arcturus said, with great dryness, Well, Amelia agreed, making a note on her clipboard. Sirius exhaled. Is it always like this? He said to Harry. I've only been doing it for 6 weeks, Harry said. But yes. So far. Yes. Sirius looked at him with those gray eyes, and something in the look was James Potter and something in it was entirely its own thing, and he said, You're going to be absolutely fine, do you know that? Harry looked back at him. Yes, he said. I do. They went home. The Tonks household in the days that followed accommodated itself to Sirius with the pragmatic warmth it had applied to Harry, a fold-out bed in the study expanding to a proper bed with Ted's cushioning charm, a portion of wardrobe space materializing through Andromeda's quietly efficient rearrangement, a specific tea preference established within 12 hours. Sirius ate everything placed in front of him with the focused attention Harry recognized and said nothing about, and slept in unpredictable hours, and occasionally appeared in the kitchen at 2 in the morning and found Harry there reading astronomy books, and they sat in the kitchen together in the quiet and talked, or didn't, depending on what the moment needed. Harry learned him in the way he learned most things, by paying close attention without pressure, letting the picture assemble itself in its own order. Sirius was funny. Not performed funny, not the kind of humor that was a social strategy, but genuinely, reflexively comic in the way of someone who had always found the world's contradictions inherently absurd. He told stories about James with the particular quality of someone keeping a person alive in the telling, the stories getting longer and more detailed as the days passed and the kitchen became a safe place for them. He was terrible at sleeping and excellent at chess, which he played with Ted in marathon sessions that lasted hours and were conducted at a volume that suggested disagreement but in the tone that actually meant deep mutual enjoyment. He was impatient with bureaucracy in every form and had already rewritten his testimony for the upcoming trial 3 times because each version made him angrier than the last, and Lupin, who came to the house twice a week now with the regularity of someone who had finally been given permission to belong somewhere, had taken over the editing on the grounds that Sirius's feelings about the ministry were valid but the Wizengamot would respond better to less profanity. He was working out how to be free. Harry watched him do it with the recognition of someone engaged in a parallel project. The bond, through all of it, continued deepening in ways they catalogued in the notebook and discussed with Andromeda and occasionally demonstrated for Amelia, who had begun keeping a formal record of the bond's capabilities with the thoroughness she brought to all professional matters and the additional quality of someone who found the subject genuinely extraordinary. The demonstration Harry found most interesting happened on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after Sirius's release, with Sirius's trial 4 days away. He and Tonks were in the garden, the September air beginning to turn, Ptolemy investigating the rosemary with the scientific focus he brought to all vegetation, and Harry had been thinking about the bond's range, specifically, whether the detection capability that had found Pettigrew in the Weasley garden had a limit, and what that limit was. "Try something," he said. "Try transforming into something that doesn't exist." Tonks looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You can replicate real people and real animals because you have a reference point," he said. "But can you build something from components? Like, something nobody has a template for?" Tonks thought about it. Then she closed her eyes. What happened took about 40 seconds. Harry felt the bond surge, not sharply, but with a sustained, building quality, like a note held on a long breath, and when Tonks opened her eyes she had become something that Harry had no classification for. Not a person, not an animal, not either of those things incorrectly assembled, but something that had the qualities of both in a configuration that was entirely original. She was approximately human in proportion, but her hands had the articulated precision of something designed for fine work. Her eyes were the compound eyes of something that saw in more directions simultaneously, and her skin had shifted to a texture that was not skin but was not skin, something between the two that didn't have a name. She held it for a full minute. Then she was herself again, slightly out of breath. "That was new," she said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "And you held it stable." "The bond held it stable," she said. "Without you I couldn't have." She stopped. "Actually I don't know that. I've never tried without you." "The book says the bond integrates over time," Harry said. "At some point we won't be able to tell the difference between what's ours individually and what the bond added, because it will all be ours." Tonks looked at him for a long moment with that particular expression, the one where she had caught up to something he'd said and was deciding what to do with it. "Are you all right with that?" she said. "It's your magic too. Your life. You didn't choose this." "Neither did you," Harry said. "No, but," she paused. "You were 8. You were in a cupboard. You didn't have the context to, Tonks," Harry said. "I've thought about this. I've thought about it a lot." He looked at the garden, at the rosemary and the opinionated roses and the thin September light on the leaves. "The bond found us. I don't know how or why. The books have theories, Dumbledore has theories, your mother has the most compelling theory but it's also the most complicated. But it found us, and what it found was, me, and you, and we work." He looked at her. "I didn't choose it but I choose it now. There's a difference." Tonks was quiet. "Also," Harry said, with the quality he'd learned from her, the particular dry delivery she'd passed to him somewhere in the last weeks, "you got me out of a cupboard. I have views about that." She made the sound she made when she was refusing to be emotional about something, a short, exhaled sound that was suppressing something larger. Her hair went the most vivid pink it had been since the day in Diagon Alley. "Right," she said. "Good. That's good." She looked at the garden. "You know Sirius asked me last night if I'd looked after you properly. What did you say?" "I told him you'd looked after yourself, mostly, and I'd been there to make it official." She glanced at him. He said that sounded right for a Potter. Harry thought about James Potter, who had made a terrible, catastrophic mistake out of love and died before he could understand how it had gone wrong. He thought about Lily, whose magic had been so fierce that it had changed the fundamental nature of what a killing curse could do. He thought about what it meant to be made from those two people, to carry their eyes and their hair and their impulse toward the people they loved and against the things that threatened them. "Tonks," he said. "When the trial is done. When it's settled and Sirius is formally cleared, what happens to the Auror candidacy?" She'd been reinstated 3 days after Pettigrew's capture, because Amelia had made clear that the administrative review would be difficult to sustain against the backdrop of a trainee who had just caught the most wanted fugitive in Wizarding Britain using an unprecedented magical capability. The reinstatement had arrived by official owl and Tonks had put it on the kitchen table and said about time and gone back to her breakfast. "I go back to the training program," she said. "Dawlish will be impossible. Can you switch supervisors?" "I'm working on it." Amelia is making noises about the Investigative Capabilities Division, which is, yes, basically yes, I can switch. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you should be an Auror," Harry said. "Not because of me or the bond. Because you're extraordinary at it and you know it and you should have it." He looked at her steadily. "Hogwarts is next September. I'll be there for most of the year. I don't want you putting things on hold." "Harry," she said, with the tone of someone about to point out a logic error. "I know about the bond's range," he said. "I've read all the chapters. The bond doesn't require physical proximity after it's fully integrated. It just requires existence. We don't have to be in the same room." "I know that," she said. "I've read the same chapters." "Then we're fine." "We're fine," she agreed. They looked at each other in the garden, and the bond hummed between them in the comfortable, unhurried way it had developed over weeks of being lived in, a frequency that was fully its own thing now, not new and startling, not intrusive, but part of the landscape of being themselves. "I'm going to miss this," Harry said. "The kitchen table and the notebooks and Ptolemy terrorizing the rosemary." "You'll be home for Christmas," Tonks said. "And summers." She looked at him. "Harry. This is your home. Not because of paperwork. Because you're ours." She said it simply, without performance, the way Tonks said all true things. "That doesn't stop because of geography." Harry nodded. He looked at the house, the too many floors, the slightly too short curtains that were a different set of slightly too short curtains from the ones he'd first woken to but had the same quality, the kitchen window where Ted could be seen through the glass making tea with the focused attention he gave all beverages, and he thought about the photograph in his pocket, the one he'd taken from under a thin mattress in a cupboard on Privet Drive, his mother's red hair and his mother's green eyes. The picture he'd carried through everything as the single physical evidence that he had come from people who loved him. He still had it. He would always have it. But it was no longer the only evidence. Sirius's trial was 4 days later, on a Thursday, and it was nothing like the Wizengamot hearing. The hearing had been procedure and precedent. The trial was Pettigrew, on Veritaserum for the second time, in front of the full Wizengamot, and it was unambiguous. The verdict took 11 minutes of deliberation. Sirius Black, not guilty on all charges. The courtroom was not quiet this time. Harry sat in the gallery and listened to the noise, genuine, unorchestrated, the noise of a large group of people who had a story they'd been told for 8 years collapsing and a true story assembling in its place, and beside him Lupin had his face in his hands, and beside Lupin, Andromeda had her eyes closed, and beside Andromeda, Ted had his arm around her with the uncomplicated steadiness that was his particular genius. And in the front row of the gallery Arcturus Black was sitting very straight with the expression of a man who had finally done the thing he owed and found that it cost more and less than he'd expected. Sirius stood at the center of the floor and heard it, and his expression was, Harry had been watching people's faces his whole life, reading rooms as survival, but he had no category for what Sirius's face was doing, because it was too many things at once, too much uncontained reality for a face to hold without fracture. And it was fracturing, and the fracture looked like relief the way a dam breaking looks like relief for the water. He looked up into the gallery and found Harry, the way he'd found him in the ministry atrium, and his face did something else on top of everything else, something specific and direct that was unmistakably just for Harry. Harry raised his hand. A small gesture. Just, present. Here. Sirius nodded. Just as small. Just as complete. After, in the wide corridor outside the courtroom, while the administrative things were being processed and Amelia was doing the necessary and Arcturus was having a word with several Wisengamot members with the particular decisiveness of someone settling long-held accounts, Sirius found Harry and sat down on a bench beside him and they were quiet for a while in the movement and noise of the corridor. "What are you thinking?" Sirius said. "That we should get a bigger kitchen table," Harry said. Sirius looked at him. "Andromeda's is fine for the 5 of us," Harry said. 6 when Lupin's there. "But it's going to be 6 regularly now, isn't it? Maybe 7. He looked at Sirius. "Unless you want your own place." Sirius stopped. Something moved in his face. "I haven't thought about wanting a place." "I haven't thought about," he stopped again. "Wanting things. As a concept. Is something I'm going to need to relearn." "You should want things," Harry said. "Start small if it's easier. The kitchen table is a reasonable start." Sirius laughed, the full, warm, uncontained version. "James said you'd be impossible," he said. Obviously he was talking about a version of you that existed in his head because you were 15 months old, but he said it like he knew. "What did he say exactly?" "He said," Sirius paused, and this pause had the quality of someone going carefully to a specific memory, the kind you keep in a particular place and handle with care. "He said, Padfoot, this one's going to run rings around both of us and she's going to watch and be smug about it and we're both going to be so proud we can't stand it." He looked at Harry. "He meant you. And Lily. He was right about both of you." Harry looked at the corridor, at the ministry's stone floors and moving photographs and the ordinary traffic of the wizarding world going about its business, and he thought about what Andromeda had said about wanting the credit first. "She'd want the credit," Harry said. "Lily. She'd want you to say she was right first." "She was always right first," Sirius said, with the ease of long practice. "James was right second and loudly. Lily was right first and quietly and then didn't say anything while you figured it out." "I know how that feels," Harry said. Sirius looked at him for a long moment with those sharp gray eyes. "We're going to figure out how to do this," Sirius said. "Me and you. Whatever it is. The after part." "The after part," Harry agreed. "I don't know how to be someone's godfather. I've been doing it extremely badly for 8 years. You were in prison for 8 years. Still counts as badly," Sirius said. "I have standards." He looked at his hands. "I have a house. Or I had a house. Grimmauld Place, black family seat, miserable, probably full of dark objects and portrait of my mother. I am told she screams." "How often?" "Constantly, presumably, she was like that when alive." He looked at Harry. "I'm going to need to gut it. Make it livable. Which is a project." He paused. "I thought you might want to be involved in that." Harry thought about a house that was dark and miserable and needed gutting and making livable, and about a man who was relearning how to want things and needed a project, and about himself, who had spent most of his life in a cupboard and had opinions, it turned out, about the way spaces should feel. "Yes," he said. "I want to be involved in that." Sirius smiled. It was a wide, slightly reckless smile, and Harry could see in it the photograph version, the young man at a wedding, and he could also see what Azkaban had cost, and he could also see that neither of those things was the whole of it, that this was just Sirius, present, complicated, alive. "Right," Sirius said. "There's a lot of work to do." There was. There was Umbridge, still out there, having survived the Pettigrew arrest and the trial and the Healer counter-petition, biding in the particular way of someone who had lost several battles and was deciding which war to fight next. There was Voldemort, diminished but not gone, the shadow at the edge of everything that Harry had filed under future problem, current preparation. There was Hogwarts in September and 11 months of training and everything he didn't know yet about being magical, being a Potter, being the person the Bond had found and the person he was choosing to be. There was a trial record to be made public and a ministry to be argued with and a very large, screaming portrait to be managed and a kitchen table to be found that could seat 7. There was Tonks, who would be an Auror, who had opened a cupboard door on a Tuesday afternoon in July and changed both their lives with the simple, complete decisiveness of someone who saw a thing that was wrong and moved to fix it. Who had gone rainbow-colored on a night bus and catalogued it as data rather than catastrophe. Who had sat across from him in every hard conversation and told him the truth and never once asked him to be smaller than he was. There was Andromeda, who had given up a family and built a better one. Ted, who made the right tea and did not make things complicated. Lupin, who was coming to dinner on Friday and had been coming to dinner on Fridays with the regularity of someone who had finally, cautiously, accepted an offer he'd been afraid to take. Arcturus, 94 years old and out of time for circumlocution and using what was left to settle what he owed. There was the bond, which hummed steadily in Harry's chest like the second string of an instrument, the harmonic that had always been there waiting for the frequency to find it. Harry stood up from the bench. He was 9 years old, which was older than he'd been when he went into the cupboard and younger than he was going to be, and the world was very large and very strange and completely full of people who had decided things about him before he had the chance to decide anything himself, and he had spent 6 weeks systematically dismantling those decisions and replacing them with his own. He was not done. He was, in the most fundamental sense, just beginning. "Come on," he said to Sirius. "The others are waiting." Sirius stood up, and they walked down the ministry corridor together, and the bond sang in the frequency between them and 3 floors up, and across London toward Hertfordshire. Harry felt Tonks feel it, that warm double note, present and steady, and felt her acknowledgement of it like a hand on a shoulder. He walked out through the ministry's main doors into the September afternoon, into the world that was his now, fully and without condition. The light hit him directly and he didn't squint.